welcome to Lincoln. Good evening and welcome to the Lincoln City Council meeting of June 26, 2023. In accordance with LB 898, please be advised that a copy of the Open Meetings Act is posted at the backs of the chambers by the northwest door. Let us all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a brief period of silent meditation. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The order of business of the Lincoln City Council is as follows. The clerk will call the items listed on the agenda. Under public hearing, anyone wishing to speak on an item should come forward after the clerk reads that item. The council shall require any member of the public desiring to address the council to identify themselves, the name of an organization or group, including an address that you might be representing, unless the address requirement is waived to protect the safety of the individual. The applicant may then make one short rebuttal. Each speaker should begin by stating their name, address, and whether you're speaking in favor of or in opposition to the item. Testimony is limited to 5 minutes per speaker. After all public hearings, the council will vote on resolutions and items listed under third reading. On the second and last Mondays of the month, immediately prior to adjournment, anyone may speak on any issue not on the agenda for that date, nor planned for a future agenda. Madam Clerk, will you please call our first item of business?
Our first item of business today for our City Council meeting Monday, June 26th is a reminder that due to the Independence Day holiday, City Council will not meet on Monday, July 3rd. Next on our agenda would be our consent agenda, sections 1 through 3.
Is there anyone here to speak on anything on the consent agenda, items 1, 2, or 3? Is there anyone here to speak on any item of the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none, let's move on.
We can now vote on these items. Items 2A and 2B were introduced by Shob.
So moved.
Second.
Second, Washington, discussion. Seeing none, Madam Clerk?
Washington,
Yes.
Weber,
Yes.
Bowers,
Yes.
Carlson,
Yes.
Duden,
Yes.
Shob,
Yes.
Beckius.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. That concludes our consent agenda. We shall now move on to our public hearing liquor resolutions. Also, as a reminder, today for our public hearing testimony, we do have 5 minutes per speaker. Speakers, please state your name and your address or organization or group before you speak. We are also using a light monitor system here on both podiums. Testifiers may come up to both sides to come up and testify. The green light will indicate your start time for your testimony. The yellow light that will appear will remind you that you have 1 minute remaining. And once the red light appears, then your time is up. That's up to 5 minutes. First up will be items 4A and 4B. I'll call together. Application of Christian Retirement Homes, Inc., doing business as Eastmount for Class C liquor license located at 6350 O Street, and the related manager application of Andrew J. Fisher.
Is there anyone here to speak on items 4A or 4B? Anyone here for 4A or 4B? Okay, let's move on.
I'll be calling items 4C and 4D together. Application of Svelva Holdings Company, LLC, doing business as Scissors and Scotch for a Class I liquor license located at 8750 South 30th Street, Suite 100, and the related manager application of Stephanie A. Vela.
Okay, come on down.
Hi.
Hi.
Good to go?
I'm going to swear you in. Do you solemnly swear and affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth as you verily believe it to be?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Hi, guys. I'm Stephanie Savela. My husband and I are opening Scissors and Scotch franchise here in Lincoln. We've been in the insurance business for about 10 years and super excited to start this new venture in the community.
Very good. Thank you for coming down. We appreciate any questions before we... Yes.
Ms.
Councilwoman.
Vela, thanks for coming down.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about your business? I'm curious about scissors and scotch.
Yeah, so it's an upscale men's grooming facility. And then on the other side, we offer a full-service lounge.
Thank you.
All right. Sounds fun.
Yeah?
All right. Any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you for coming down. We appreciate it. Is there anyone else here who would like to speak on applications, or excuse me, items 4C or 4D? All right, seeing none, let's move on.
I'll be calling item 4E, manager application of Nathan J. Likas for Granite City Inc., doing business as Granite City Food and Brewery located at 6200 O Street.
Is there anyone here to speak on item 4E? Hi, come on down.
All right, hello.
Do you solemnly swear and affirm the truth this testimony you're about to give is the truth as you verily believe it to be?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You just want to give us your name and address to start out with?
Yes, my name is Nathan Likas. Live at 2348 South 39th Street.
Okay. Nathan, will you tell us a little bit about the application? It looks like you're applying to become the manager for Granite City.
Yes. I joined the team at the beginning of March and have had to go back and redo some of the training along the way. And this is another spot for me here to come in and I guess take the helm.
Face the fire, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Any questions for the applicant at all? All right, we're good.
Thank you.
you so much for coming down. We
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it. Is there anyone else here who would like to speak on item 4E? Okay, let's move on.
I'll be calling item 4F, application of Bar at the Yard LLC, doing business as Longwells, for a special designated license to cover an L-shaped outdoor area measuring approximately 208 feet by 82 feet and 300 feet by 74 feet at Canopy Street from R to Q Street and R Street from Canopy to 7th Street on July 15th, 2023 from 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. I'll swear you in. Do you solemnly swear and affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth as you verily believe it to be?
I do.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm Eric Marsh with Longwells, 350 North Canopy Street, Suite 100. On July 15th, we're going to have a concert in the intersection of Canopy and R Street. We're actually going to have general admission going down Canopy Street and more of a VIP seated table service going down R Street. Stage sitting at a catty corner in the intersection directly facing Longwells. Thought that was the best way to handle any kind of noise complaints because the loudest place will be inside Longwells and we won't be complaining. All right? It's the two rectangles. It's the only way to describe this thing. It's all of Canopy Street all the way down to the end. It's all of our street down to, and I say to the end of our block. We won't be touching either of the intersections at the end of Canopy. So the Canopy and Q is clear, 7th and R is clear. We have a backstage area. They have about a 45-foot trailer that they're pulling in with them. So the rest of our street will be closed. We're working with Mello to make sure that they still have access. The special event is much more complex than the concert. The concert is just one evening from 5 to 11. We're starting our SDL an hour before and running it until an hour after, just so we don't have a big rush at either of the cutoff points. And then we will be tearing down throughout the early morning hours on the 12th and having the intersection back open by noon was requested.
All right.
All right.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the applicant? No? Okay. Oh,
I am.
Councilwoman.
All
yes.
right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Who are you having
Yeah,
coming
who
in
is
to perform?
playing?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I said that. Boy, I missed that. Randy Rogers Band. They've been there before and they've done that. And I thought someone was going to ask. I was leading the lever. We have everyone signed off on this. All right. So hopefully next week you will see my co-tenants here getting their application missed for the cutoff for today's meeting. But we should have Gate and Hero and Mello should be here to apply for their SDL or at least have it sent in. All right.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Is there anyone else here who would like to testify on item 4F? All right, seeing none.
Mr. Chair, seeing no one else coming forward to testify on these items, I'd like to make a motion that we approve item 4A through 4F.
Second?
Second by Washington. Comments? All right, seeing none, please call the roll.
Bowers.
Yes.
Carlson.
Yes.
Schob.
Yes.
Duden.
Yes.
Washington.
Yes.
Weber.
Yes.
Beckius.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Okay. That concludes section 4 of our agenda. We shall now move on to section 5, our public hearing resolutions. Item 5A is approving the suspension of LES Economic Development Rider.
Doing much better.
I am, yes. Thank you. So I'm Emily Koenig, Vice President and CFO of Lincoln Electric Systems. So I'm here to speak on behalf of, in support, I guess, of the suspension of the Economic Development Rider for LES. Because this rider is offered through our retail rate schedules, it's required that the Administrative Board and also the City Council approve the suspension of the rider. Just to give you a little background, it was implemented in 2018 to incentivize or encourage economic development and bring that to Lincoln. This was during a time when LES had additional capacity available, generation capacity, and also the pricing for capacity was much less than it is today. And so over the, I guess what the rider does is it provides a declining discount on the demand charge on customer bills for those customers that have a high load factor, which means they're very efficient customers, so they have a good use of our system. They also must qualify for the Imagine Nebraska Act as well. And so the declining discount over time and not over more than 5 years provides them the opportunity to receive in the first year a 50% discount on the demand charge, a 40% the second year, on so forth through 5 years. And then the customer must remain a customer of LES for an additional 5 years, or they're subject to repaying that discount that they received along with a 5% adder for any payment of lieu of taxes. So since we started the rider in 2018, we've had one customer that's been on the rider. They are in the third year of their 5-year term. We've had another customer that's signed the agreement but hasn't taken service with us yet. The reason for the suspension is due to forecasted growth in our service area, including just normal growth, but also the potential for large data centers that might eat up some of the capacity that we have. And essentially, you don't want to sell something at a discount that you may not have available to sell. And if we keep it in place, there may be a detrimental financial impact to LES's existing customers in order to provide additional capacity going forward. So we're seeking a suspension. The intent is that we would suspend it August 1st. Any customers that are on the rider currently or join the rider by August 1st would be able to stay on it through their credit period, and then we would intend to terminate it at the end of that, which should be no later than 2031. So I would entertain any questions if you have any.
Any questions for Emily?
Okay.
All right.
Thank
very
you.
good. Thank you. Appreciate it. Is there anyone else here who would like to speak on item 5A? Seeing none, let's move to 5B.
Item 5B, approving the 2023-24 interlocal agreement on stormwater management between the city and Lower Platte South Natural Resources District to address stormwater quality and quantity issues.
Good evening,
Mr.
Mr.
Zock.
Chair, members of the council. My name is Tim Zock, and I'm the Superintendent of Stormwater with the Watershed Management Division of Lincoln Transportation and Utilities, 555 South 10th Street. Thank you, Benny. Before I get into the details of this annual work plan before you today, I want to give you a brief history. Well, I forgot to introduce Mark Lindeman too. Mark Lindeman is the district engineer with the Lower Platte South Natural Resources District.
Good afternoon.
So I want to give you a brief history of this agreement and the work that the city has been doing with the NRD for quite a few years. So since there's some of you new on the council, I wanted to kind of go through a little bit of the history of this agreement. And so for those of you that may not be familiar with the Natural Resources Districts, the NRDs in Nebraska are local government entities whose boundaries follow the major river basins and who are responsible for protecting our natural resources. The Lower Platte South NRD covers part of 6 counties and includes a significant portion of Lancaster County, with the city of Lincoln being entirely located within their boundary. The Lower Platte South NRD's mission statement is to maintain a sustainable environment through conservation of land, water, and wildlife. The Lower Platte South NRD operates and maintains 200 flood control dams, 13 miles of levees along Salt Creek, and 12 miles of urban stream channels. The city and the NRD entered into an interlocal agreement in 1996 to cooperate in addressing stormwater quality and quantity issues in the city of Lincoln. This 1996 agreement originated from an agreement in 1965 with the city, the county, and the Salt Wahoo Watershed District, so the predecessor to the Lower Platte South NRD. The intent of these agreements was to divide out the responsibilities between the parties, with the NRD being responsible for the major named creeks, so Salt Creek, Beale Slough, Antelope Creek, and then the city being responsible for the other storm drainage within the city. Over the last 25 plus years, the city and the NRD have partnered in watershed master planning, constructing flood control, water quality, and stream stability projects, updating floodplain and stormwater standards, updating our floodplain maps, and conducting floodplain and stormwater education. This annual work plan before you today spells out what specific projects and initiatives the city and the NRD will be cooperating in this next year, who will be the lead agency for each of these items, and what the cost share will be. So real quickly, I want to highlight a few of the projects in this annual work plan. First, the Dead Man's Run Flood Control Project is one that's been going on for quite a while. That's continuing on and progressing this year with the Corps and getting closer to construction. And the NRD is the lead on that project. We also have a stream stabilization project on Salt Creek and Wilderness Park that the NRD is the lead on. The city is the lead on the floodplain remapping that we're getting started with, as well as a feasibility study of flood mitigation strategies for Salt Creek that we'll be starting on this year. And as well as both of us will be continuing our community education on flood control and stormwater. So with that, I'll take any questions you guys may have.
Any questions for Mr. Zock? Seeing none, very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate guys down. Thank you. Is there anyone else here who would like to testify on this item? Hi. Adam, please come on down.
Good evening, councilors. I'm Adam Hintz with Friends Wilderness Park at 1919 Prospect Street. Just testifying in support of this resolution. We're really excited for this next step forward with this partnership with the NRD and Watershed. We're mainly really excited to see the stabilization project in Wilderness Park underneath the bridge, the Rock Island Trail bridge that goes over Salt Creek. That's known as Danger Bridge. And so stabilizing that creek will then lead to the rehabilitation and restoration of that bridge. So a lot more park users will have access, safe access, east and west in the park. So it's going to be really great. And that bridge restoration was funded by Friends Wilderness Park and the Lincoln Parks Foundation. So there's a lot of amazing different organizations working together in that one small space. And so Friends Wilderness Park is here to work with the NRD and Watershed in any way we can, especially in terms of education, helping get the word out. And we're just here to be cheerleaders for this. So thank you.
Very good. Any questions for Adam? All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. Is there anyone else here who would like to speak on item 5B? Okay, let's move on to item 5C.
Item 5C, approving an agreement between the City of Lincoln on behalf of the Lincoln-Lancaster County Health Department and the Nebraska Association of Local Health Directors to accept a 2-year sub-grant in the amount of $112,455 to address issues associated with health equity concerns and social determinants of health through community health workers in community settings to screen, educate, and empower diverse community members to address a range of prevention and healthcare issues.
Good evening, Pat Lopez, Health Director, Lincoln Lancaster Health Department. I just am really excited that we have this opportunity now. Actually, Nebraska Total Care, one of the Medicaid managed care plans, is providing the funding for this program. And partly we were selected because we had the opportunity to provide this in the community. So it's really strengthening what we have, and hopefully it will lead to additional supports for community members that are in need of other things besides just their health insurance. So we can look at the bigger picture of making sure they get connected to housing, food, and other types of resources.
Very good. Brock, did you have anything?
He's
came
waiting.
up for 5E, sorry.
Oh, okay, very good. Is there anyone here who would like to ask any questions on item 5C? Counselors? Nope. Okay, very good. Is there anyone else here who would like to testify on item 5C? Seeing none, let's move on to 5D.
Item 5D is approving the memorandum of understanding between the City of Lincoln on behalf of Lincoln Lancaster County Health Department and Bryan Medical Center to implement the Universal Home Visitation Family Connects program, who have delivered or welcomed new babies through adoption in Lancaster County.
I'm really pleased. Again, Pat Lopez, Health Director, Lincoln Lancaster. I'm really pleased to be here. The council, for those of you who were here when we adopted the budget last year, this is the fruition of that work to provide universal home visitation to new parents in our community. So this is one of the final steps, and you're going to be hearing about our program start in the very near future. We brought staffing on board, and one of the things we have to have is this agreement between Bryan, and you'll be seeing later on in your agenda as the first reading for the same agreement with St. E's. The hospitals are very excited. It's been a really positive experience, and our advisory group will be meeting July 11th, made up of community members and others to guide us in the program. The brochure is coming out. It's not final yet, but that's what it's going to look like. That's going to be provided. So we're really, really excited about where we are, and thank you to the council for the support and letting us move forward in that area.
Any questions at all? Brock, are you going to say anything?
I'm good.
Support? Okay, very good. Any questions, counselors?
I don't.
Okay, very good. Thank you both. Appreciate it. Is there anyone else here who would like to testify on item 5D? Anyone else here to testify? All right, very good. Thank you both. Appreciate it. Yeah,
I'll be calling item 5E.
you're never going to go away.
After this.
You're standing up here perpetually.
Item 5E, Comprehensive Plan Conformance 23005, application of Lincoln Lancaster County Health Department to amend other waste management programs project in the fiscal year 22-23 through 27-28 CIP to add Has to Go Lincoln's Hazardous Waste Center, a project for construction of a material reuse facility on the property generally located at 5101 North 48th Street.
Okay, Brock.
Okay.
Here we go.
Good evening, members of the council. My name is Brock Hennish. I'm the Environmental Public Health Division Manager at Lincoln Lancaster County Health Department, 3131 O Street. So before you is this resolution to approve the amendment to the schedule of capital improvement projects to include other waste management programs for the fiscal year 22-23 through 27-28 CIP, including this particular project, which is the Has to Go Lincoln's Hazardous Waste Center, which will ultimately be the construction of a reuse facility. Funds for this are from the Nebraska Environmental Trust grant that we received. I was up here approximately a month ago. That's the $1.3 million grant that we received. And here we have, this is up near the transfer station at 5101 North 48th Street. So this is our current Lincoln's Hazardous Waste Center. It has to go. And then this is the rough schematic of the addition for the reuse facility. So if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer those.
Any questions for Brock? Councilwoman?
Thank you. Mr. Hanish, how does it change the clients or the residents' experience there when they bring something up?
No, that's a great question. The hope is that we're going to drive more individuals to the facility once the reuse center opens. And to touch upon that, this is a 3-year grant. So within 3 years, we hope to have this constructed. And as part of that, there's also branding and marketing involved as well. So standard process is individuals drive in, come under this awning and drop off. We have staff that unload vehicles, and we take it inside the facility and then segregate it and then get rid of it according to DOT regulations and fill it up. the hope is that that'll help with the flow. Individuals can park here, get the reuse items that they're going to utilize, and then head back on their way.
Thank you.
Other questions for Brock? Okay, very good. Thank you both. And it sounded bad. I didn't want you to go away necessarily. So it's just you guys have so many agenda items here today. Is there anyone else here who would like to speak on item 5E? Anyone else here for 5E? Okay, very good. Let's move on to 5F.
Item 5F is approving the appointment of members to the Downtown Business Improvement District Board and directing the board to make recommendations to the City Council for the amendment of the Downtown Business Improvement District Management and Maintenance District boundaries and establishing a plan for maintenance and improvements within those boundaries.
Good afternoon or evening, City Council members. Hallie Salem, Urban Development Department, 555 South 10th Street, Suite 205. Before you today is a resolution to appoint members of the Downtown Business Area Improvement Board. This is a separate board from the Downtown Lincoln Association Board and is being created for the purposes of considering an expansion of the existing Downtown Business Improvement District boundaries into East Downtown. The Downtown Master Plan envisions a greater downtown area. And as part of that greater downtown area, as downtown continues to redevelop with projects like Assurity, an Academy, West or O Street projects, projects along Antelope Valley Parkway, including Antelope Tower and Union that will be coming online, as well as Telegraph District, that all these projects demand greater service and support from an organization like Downtown Lincoln Association. And in fact, Downtown Lincoln Association is contracted to provide some additional services in those areas already. And that this extending the boundaries or expanding the boundaries further east will allow them to provide consistent service throughout the area. The Business Improvement District will next make a recommendation for the BID area to the City Council. So here is where we're at today with the public hearing of appointments to the BID board. The BID board will convene tomorrow and make, assuming that they're approved, and make recommendations to City Council for these boundaries. There will be a mailing that goes out and a public hearing on an ordinance will follow up at the end of July.
Very good.
Todd Ogden with Downtown Lincoln Association is here to provide additional information, but I'm also available to answer any questions either now or following Todd's presentation.
Do we have any questions for Ms. Salem before we get to Todd? Okay, let's bring up Todd.
Good evening, counselors. I had a handout too, if that's okay. There you go. Todd Ogden, Downtown Lincoln Association, 206 South 13th Street, Suite 101. Welcome, counselors and new counselors. Good to see you. You're going to be really bored of me by the time your tenure's up, but that's our goal, to let you know what's going on. And I appreciate Hallie and the city working with us to go over this process. And this expansion process has basically gone on since 2019. We had property owners reach out to say they were interested in our services. And we've done this before in the West Haymarket where we expanded. And our Business Improvement District organization has been around since 1967. Our first business improvement districts were in about 1987. And in the 90s, we expanded the management boundary to this area as we know it today. And in 2014, we expanded to the West Haymarket, and here we are today looking at Telegraph District and surrounding areas. So we had a committee meet about 3 years ago to kind of look at some of the boundaries, and with the pandemic, we decided to take a little pause. Didn't want to approach property owners that way until we got a hold of what was going on with the area post-pandemic, and it certainly has been growing and thriving since. And the packet that I handed out is what we've given to our property owners a couple times over the last 2 years. And really, the public process for them began with an open house in March of 2022. That's where we basically drew a boundary of all East Downtowns and invited everybody to say, hey, we're thinking about expanding this district. Would you be interested? And would you want to be a part of this? Since then, we finalized the map, or took stakeholder surveys, actually sent them out mailers, say this is what it would cost you as a special assessment. We were trying to get responses back, so we figured if we put what it actually cost, we'd get more responses, and that helped a little bit. So our goal has been to reach out to all the property owners as much as we possibly can until it goes before council. And that would be the goal. The next step is to have this business improvement board, which is selected, which is a mix of our DLA board and some members and property owners and businesses in the east part of downtown. And they would officially look at these boundaries and officially declare the boundaries. Again, none of this should be new to any of the property owners since we've been sending them out. Would be the 5th mailing. And hopefully from there, we will be able to have a public hearing sometime next month and hear from us again and the property owners and see what our program of work would look like with that and start working on an area that continues to thrive and make sure we're a full, cohesive downtown. Any questions?
Very good. Any questions for Todd? All right, seeing none. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else here who would like to testify on item 5F? Anyone else here for item 5F? All right, seeing none, let's move on to 5G.
Item 5G, 5-year strategic plan 23 through 27 and fiscal year 23 annual action plan for HUD entitlement programs.
Director Marvin.
Good evening, Dan Marvin, Urban Development, 555 South 10th. What you have before you is the 5-year strategic plan for basically how we propose to spend federal dollars, CDBG, home, and ESG dollars. So in your packet, it will kind of give you an outline of where those dollars are going to be spent. We had focus groups that identified key areas that they wanted the dollars to go to. We did a survey of residents. We were informed by the comp plan, the downtown master plan, conversations with our partners, Continuum of Care, and the dollars will look pretty much like what we've been spending our funds on. We have a housing development program with Habitat. We do lead-based paint mitigation. We also have a separate $3.4 million lead paint remediation that is separate from these dollars. These have a little more flexibility into them. We do direct and deferred loan. We have a first-time home loan program, variety of other programs. Most of them are geared towards keeping owner occupants in their home so that they can remain, in the area that's most affordable for them. We have rescue dollars. These would be dollars where we would actually go in and acquire a property that's become so dilapidated, and we can rescue those. We provide funds for community crops. And the last one, aside from the homeless service providers, which is basically ESG dollars as a pass-through to Continuum of Care, we've also got a new program that we've been able to fit in here called RentWise. So just to kind of give you a few pictures, because I know pictures are like 1,000 words, so this will make things briefer. These dots indicate places where we have provided first-time home buyer assistance over the last 10 years. You don't need to count them. There's 181 of those dots on there. So we've provided generally $25,000, but as home prices have gone up, we've provided additional assistance to help first-time home buyers get into a home. We've provided assistance for community crops so that residents can, in some areas, can grow crops. We've provided CDBG funds. If you drive down 11th Street, you'll see the lights on 11th Street that have been put in with CDBG funds. This is a before and after picture. This was what Wynn would describe as the worst alley in Lincoln. It's now no longer the worst alley in Lincoln. We will take CDBG funds to go after the next worst alley in Lincoln. When you want to know what we do for rental rehab, here's an example of a bathroom that we did rental rehab on, or not rental rehab, rehab. We don't do rental rehab with this particular program. We have another one that does that. This is a crumbling entryway. We've gone in there and provided work in this. Up in the Havelock area, this was a home that needed new windows and siding and a front porch. Here's kind of a before and after picture. It's a little dark here, but it doesn't look quite as crumbling as that. And like I say, rescue is a key thing that we do. Somebody has, it's a cold day, their furnace gives out. You know, they have no funds to be able to get a new furnace in there. They can turn to urban development if the income qualify, and we can get a new furnace in there. Generally, our terms are very favorable. It's usually a 0% interest rate and a no payment, but we put a lien on the property, so when the property does transfer and sell, then those dollars come back into the program and we reuse them out again. This was an old electrical box. This is before and after pictures on a water heater, provided ingress so that someone could expand to their basement and provide a safe bedroom in the basement of a home. Before, I'm just about to the end here, before and after pictures on a kitchen remodel that we did. Here's a bathroom. You'll notice that we've been able to put grab bars. So a lot of the homes that we do work in are elderly homes. We're preserving those homes for future generations, but we're also being able to create a way for that the elderly can stay in their homes, which is generally one of the more affordable places for them to live. Here's a crumbling basement. We've been able to go in and do the foundation work. We do air conditioners, and then just one last little amount or little information on RentWise. We've supported RentWise as a program. This particular program that's before you would provide $25,000 of operating dollars. We have, through the university, created an online platform for this so that it can be widely dispersed to large numbers of people, so that people are entering into contracts to rent will know what they're getting into. And the reason we're excited about this program is that the eviction rate of people who have gone through RentWise is significantly lower than the eviction rate of those people who haven't. So we think we can bend the curve and stop evictions before they have them if people have the right knowledge about what they're getting into when they contract for a rental. We've gone to present it to RIOMA. They're excited about this program, and so we're going to support this with these funds as well. I'll stop there and answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions for Director Marvin? Councilwoman, yes.
Thank you. Director Marvin, thank you for explaining RentWise. That started to answer some of the questions I had. I just have one more question for you. How does someone find their way to the RentWise program?
It's on the website, so if you were to Google RentWise Lincoln, Nebraska, you will get to their website, and that will kick you off so you can log into an account and you can go through this. Kurt tells me they're working with LPS to see if this can be a curriculum that would start people off at a very early age. We're talking, you know, seniors in high school, understanding what the obligations and the contracts that they're going into when they go out and seek their first apartment. We've worked through the university for university students as well. And I think that statewide, the number of people that have gone through RentWise is over 10,000, it could be 15,000, and the largest percentage of that have been people from Lincoln. So we're talking 40–50% of the people who've gone through RentWise are Lincoln residents. So as we continue to keep pushing that through, we have a more informed public who's able to contract with rent and do it in such a way that they don't get in over their head.
I think it sounds fantastic. I know there's a class at LPS for juniors or seniors to figure out how to pick up the skills they need, and
Right.
and certainly children coming out of the foster program, graduating out of that program also could really use that. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for Director Marvin? All right, thank you, appreciate it. Is there anyone else here who would like to speak on item 5G? Anyone else here who would like to speak on item 5G? All right, seeing none, let's move on to voting.
Okay, we shall now vote on these items. Item 5A is approving the suspension of LES Economic Development Rider, introduced by Bowers.
So moved.
Second. Second, Carlson. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Bowers.
Yes.
Carlson.
Yes.
Duden.
Yes.
Weber.
Yes.
Schob.
Yes.
Washington.
Yes.
Beckius.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Item 5B is approving the 23-24 interlocal agreement of stormwater management between the city and Lower Platte South Natural Resources District to address stormwater quality and quantity issues, introduced by Bowers.
So moved.
Second. Second, Carlson. Discussion? Seeing none.
Duden.
Yes.
Washington.
Yes.
Carlson.
Yes.
Schob.
Yes.
Weber.
Yes.
Bowers.
Yes.
Beckius.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Item 5C, approving an agreement between the City of Lincoln on behalf of the Lincoln-Lancaster County Health Department and the Nebraska Association of Local Health Directors to accept a 2-year subgrant in the amount of $112,455 to address issues associated with health equity concerns and social determinants of health through community health workers and community settings to screen, educate, and empower diverse community members to address a range of prevention and healthcare issues, introduced by Bowers.
So moved. Second.
Second, Schob. Comments? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Weber.
Yes.
Bowers.
Yes.
Schob.
Yes.
Carlson.
Yes.
Washington.
Yes.
Duden.
Yes.
Beckius.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Item 5D is approving the memorandum of understanding between the City of Lincoln on behalf of Lincoln-Lancaster Health Department and Bryan Medical Center to implement the Universal Home Visitation Family Connects program, who have delivered or welcomed new babies through adoption in Lancaster County, introduced by Bowers.
So moved. Second.
Second, Schob. Discussion? Yes, Councilman.
I just want to say, I just want to take a moment to express my support for approving this MOU between Lincoln and Lancaster County Health Department and Bryan Medical Center for our Universal Home Visitation Program for infants and their families. Investing in the well-being and development of our youngest residents is crucial for the future success and prosperity of Lincoln and Lancaster County. Home visitation programs have consistently shown a positive impact on child development, family stability, and community outcomes. With this MOU in place and future MOUs from other hospitals and community collaboration, we can leverage the expertise and resources of our local hospitals to provide guidance, resources, and support to families. This collaboration will ensure that every infant in our city has a fair shot at a bright future. Universal home visitation, using the Family Connects model, we can address the existing disparities in our community regardless of income or background, and all families will have access to these services, leveling the playing field and giving every child an equal opportunity to thrive. Prioritizing the well-being of our youngest residents should always be a priority for us, and supporting the universal home visitation programs through this MOU. This initiative has the potential to break the cycle of poverty, boost school readiness, and reduce the long-term social costs associated with negative outcomes for children. I think this is one of the best things that we accomplished in my first term, and I'm looking forward to seeing this program grow.
Thank you, Councilman. Anyone else? All right, let's call the roll.
Weber.
Yes.
Schob.
Yes.
Washington.
Yes.
Duden.
Yes.
Bowers.
Yes.
Carlson.
Yes.
Beckius.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Item 5E is Comprehensive Plan Conformance 23005, application of Lincoln Lancaster County Health Department to amend other waste management programs project in the fiscal year 22-23 through 27-28 CIP to add Has to Go Lincoln's Hazardous Waste Center, a project for construction of a material reuse facility on the property generally located at 5101 North 48th Street, introduced by Bowers.
So moved.
Second?
Second, Washington, discussion? Seeing none, let's please call the roll.
Schob,
Yes.
Carlson,
Yes.
Bowers,
Yes.
Weber,
Yes.
Washington,
Yes.
Duden,
Yes.
Beckius.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Item 5F is approving the appointment of members to the Downtown Business Improvement District Board and directing the board to make recommendations to the City Council for the amendment of the Downtown Business Improvement District Management and Maintenance District boundaries and establishing a plan for maintenance and improvements within those boundaries, introduced by Bowers.
So moved.
Second. Second, Carlson, discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Washington,
Yes.
Duden,
Yes.
Carlson,
Yes.
Bowers,
Yes.
Weber,
Yes.
Schob,
Yes.
Beckius.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Item 5G is 5-year strategic plan 23 through 27 of fiscal year 23, annual action plan for HUD entitlement programs, introduced by Bowers.
So moved.
Second.
Second, Schob, discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Bowers.
Yes.
Washington.
Yes.
Duden.
Yes.
Carlson.
Yes.
Schob.
Yes.
Weber.
Yes.
Beckius.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. That concludes Section 5 of our agenda. We shall move to Section 6, public hearing ordinances, second reading and related resolutions. Item 6A is comprehensive plan conformance 23007, declaring approximately .46 acres of the city-owned property generally located at 6930 West Shore Drive as surplus.
Mr. C. Good evening, Tim C., City Assistant City Attorney, it's my address, 555 South 10th Street. Just a quick item before you tonight. This is a surplus property request for the Pine Lake Association. This goes back to an annexation agreement from 2003 in which the city took over the assets of SID number 2. Within that agreement, it was stated that the city would convey those parcels back to the Pine Lake Association when there was no longer a need for the city to own them. That time has come. We're talking about less than half an acre of property combined between the two. They're really two remnants that if you drove through the neighborhood, you wouldn't, it wouldn't stand out to you as being anything separate. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any
questions for Mr. C? All right, seeing none.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else here who would like to testify on this item? All right, very good. Let's move on.
I'll be calling item 6B, street name change 23001, application of the City of Lincoln Planning Department for the naming of West Vine Street from Northwest 48th Street to Northwest 56th Street, and also to name Northwest 50th and Northwest 52nd Streets, generally located in the vicinity of the Lincoln Northwest High School between Interstate 80 and West Holdridge Street.
Good evening, David Carey, Director of the Planning Department, 555 South 10th Street. I'm going to put a visual up on the overhead just to kind of help tell the story here. This is, it's identified as a street name change. It's actually a street naming. So what has happened here is that we've had the beginning of construction for West Vine Street, west of Northwest 48th Street to serve the new Northwest High School. That right-of-way has been dedicated. And there are plans to complete the construction of West Vine Street over to Northwest 56th Street. And this is all part of the LPS site out there. There also are plans in the future to develop on the south side of this stretch of West Vine for future commercial and industrial development. What did not happen when there was a right-of-way dedication was a formal street naming of the street. So everybody acknowledges that this is West Vine Street, but we do need to, for addressing as well as for emergency response purposes, we need to make sure that it's on the books formally as West Vine Street. We also have Northwest 50th and Northwest 52nd Street identified as being named as well. This is completely in line with what has already been discussed out there. It's not new information, it's just that we need to take this step to actually name these streets as such. I will note that the Street Naming Committee reviewed this proposal as they are required to, and they do recommend approval. This item did not have to go to the Planning Commission. Street naming does not have to go to the Planning Commission for action. So just want to be clear on that. So with that, I can answer any questions you have, and I appreciate your time this evening.
Any questions for Director Carey about street naming? Councilwoman?
I do. One, as I was looking at this, I took a slide, widened the screen, I guess, and looked a little bit broader. Will West Vine actually run between Northwest 48th East? Well, is there plans for it to connect to the east?
Yes, so there is conceptually is going to make a connection. The exact alignment that's still to be is being discussed or will be discussed.
Thank you.
Any other questions? See none? Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Is there anyone else here who would like to testify on item 6B? All right, let's move on to 6C.
I'll be calling items 6C, 6D, 6E, and 6F together. 6C, Comprehensive Plan Amendment 23006, application of PAR 72 LLC to amend the Lincoln-Lancaster County 2050 Comprehensive Plan to revise the future land use map by changing the designation from green space to residential and commercial on property generally located at Southwest 40th Street and West A Streets. And the related annexation 23006, application of PAR 72 LLC to annex approximately 17 acres more or less on property generally located at Southwest 40th and West A Streets. And the related conditional annexation and change of zone agreement between the city and PAR 72 LLC for the property generally located at the northeast corner of Southwest 40th Street and West A Street, and the related change of zone 23021, application of PAR 72 LLC to change from AG Agricultural District R3 residential planned unit development on the property generally located at Southwest 40th and West A Streets.
Good evening, members of the council. Danae Kalkowski, 1128 Lincoln Mall, Suite 105. Here tonight on behalf of PAR 72. I might ask just for an extra minute or two. I don't think I'll need it, but in case I do, since we're going to hit all four of these applications at the same time. Also here tonight, I have Brandon Bartek and Brad Marshall from Olson if you start giving me any tough questions about the floodplain. So the four applications we have before you tonight are all related to about 119 acres that are located at the northwest corner of Southwest 40th and West A Street. And I'm going to start with the comprehensive plan amendment request. So we have two requests that are changing on the site, and then there's one that's off the site that planning has added to our comp plan request. So we've got two areas that we're asking to change from green space to urban density residential. And then there's another portion right here that'll go to urban density residential. And then that's about 19 acres. And then I think there's about 6 acres that would be going from the green space to the commercial. And then up to the north, you see there's some industrial property that's owned by the city that the city's asking for that to be changed to green space. For the property that's on our site, about half of that area is outside of the floodplain, so we're making an adjustment to just pull land out of the floodplain that's shown as green space. But about half of it, primarily kind of over in this commercial area, is located in the floodplain. And so the area that we're going to be removing is going to be mitigated by some of the actions that we're going to be taking as part of the land use applications. One of those things is to grant a conservation easement over the remaining green space. We're also going to be planting native grasses in that area and providing some additional flood storage volume in that area to compensate for the loss of the floodplain. So the entire property right now is being master planned under a R3 PUD, which is a planned unit development. Overall, it's going to permit about 170 single-family units. Those are shown on the site there. We've got a couple areas designated for up to 480 units of multifamily. Those are shown here, and then some form potentially of multifamily in that area. And then we have approximately 53,000 of future commercial areas shown kind of on the north side of the intersection there. And I've kind of highlighted that area for the conservation easement. This development's going to provide a nice mix of housing types and bring new housing to this area of Southwest Lincoln. We anticipate more reasonably priced lots out here, hopefully getting you a little bit closer to a starter home type home out here, so we're looking forward to that. While we're master planning the entire area right now for land use, we're only requesting the annexation and zoning of the first phase, which is about 17 acres. You can kind of see that by the little dotted line. And that's really located at that intersection with Southwest 36th Street. That phase probably will start once that intersection is in. Right now, there's a roundabout plan to be constructed at that location as part of the West A Street construction project that's underway right now. This is kind of a similar process to what we did out in Wandering Creek, where we master planned the entire PUD, but then we've been coming in with phases as we're ready to develop each additional area. But similar to that PUD, we did approve the grading and drainage plan for the entire site. So master planned and approved that up front. So if any changes are made, you'll hear about those as we come in with the different phases. But probably the most important part of that grading and drainage plan is that the developer is going to be excavating in that floodplain area. Right now, we're showing to increase the floodplain storage from 55 acre feet to 356 acre feet. So there'll be a substantial amount of storage that'll be added in that area. And then the conservation easement will be placed on that to protect that flood storage volume. And the developer has been working on a private agreement with the Lincoln Youth Complex that will allow the youth complex to utilize some of that flood storage volume that's being increased in this area. There are some waivers needed for the PUD. Staff supported and Planning Commission supported all of the waivers other than at the time of Planning Commission detention. We had a request for a waiver of on-site detention. There was some additional information needed by Watershed at that time. That information has since been provided to Watershed, and so staff is supporting all of the waivers. And I think your draft ordinance provides for the approval of all of the waivers. Final item on your agenda is the annexation agreement. Again, it's kind of a document that we're master planning the infrastructure for the entire site. Because there is already sewer available to this and water available, we're really just talking about our two, primarily our two intersections there. There's one other thing in that annexation agreement that I want to mention to you because it will require some future council action. So since 2020, the developer's been working with the city on this site. The city started their process for doing the West A Street improvements. We're trying to figure out what to design for improvements out here. Obviously, what to design at this intersection was pretty important. So a lot of conversations happened clear back in 2020 about what should be constructed there, kind of dependent upon what sort of development was going to happen here. And so we knew Par 72 was going to be bringing this area forward for development. So there was conversation at that time about working with the city to get a roundabout built there up front day one so that it'd be in place to serve the development. Bob agreed as part of those conversations to cooperate with the city, grant all the right-of-way that would be needed from his property at no cost to the city, all the easements, gave up rights of access off of West A Street for one of the acreage properties there, and just did a few other things, and in return was requesting that the city had to purchase a lot. This map might help show it a little better. The city had to purchase a lot to the west in order to get the right-of-way because it impacted a home there in order to make the roundabout work. And so once the project is completed, there should be excess right-of-way that the city would have that would fit within this project. And so we've requested that when the project is completed, there's an opportunity to surplus that be exchanged with Mr. Benish for all of the right-of-way and other concessions that he's made to the city in the cooperation up till now. So you aren't going to see that probably for a while yet until this project gets completed out here, but that will be coming, and that is addressed in the annexation agreement. Just as far as neighborhood outreach, we sent a letter out to the surrounding neighbors providing information about this project prior to Planning Commission. I had a couple calls requesting some additional information. I think Planning probably talked to a couple folks out there just kind of explaining what's going on. Nobody showed up at Planning Commission to testify in opposition or in support. We got unanimous approval with the Planning Commission. We agreed to the conditions that were worked out with staff. So I don't really have anything that is controversial at this point on the project. So we're asking for your approval of all 4 of these items. I think it'll be a great new project for this area of our city. And it's one project where we get to take advantage of some existing infrastructure, the water and the sewer that are there, and the road that's going to be there just in time to help move this development forward. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. As I mentioned, I've got some engineers from Olson if you've got any tough questions.
Very good, thank you. Yes, Councilman.
I have one question. How much is a reasonably priced lot? You brought that up.
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah?
I'll have to ask the client, but he has 2 different building companies that he uses. Remington Homes is kind of his starter home, and he intends these lots to be used for his Remington Homes, which are more starter. But I can't give you exactly what the price point will
The
be.
range?
I don't know if they're still in the 70s for a reasonably priced lot anymore, I would say, because then you're 80s and 90s.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yep.
That is crazy.
Any other questions, sir?
No.
Very good.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions for Danae at this point?
Great, thank
Okay,
you.
very good. Thank you. Is there anyone else here who would like to speak on items 6C, D, E, or F? Anyone else here who would like to speak on items 6C, D, E, or F? All right, very good. Let's move on.
Okay.
Go get Councilwoman. I think she's back there. She is? Ah.
I'll be calling item 6G, approving the lease agreement between the City of Lincoln and R.C. Kruger Development Company, LLC.
AC Jackson.
Good evening, Brian Jackson. I'm Assistant Chief of Police, Lincoln Police Department, headquarters address 575 South 10th. Here to speak on or answer any questions to 6G. It is a lease agreement, and the contents of which are fairly self-explanatory, so if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
All right, any questions for AC Jackson? Seeing none. Thank you, sir, for coming. Appreciate it. All right, anyone else who would like to testify on item 6G? All right, seeing none, let's move on to 6H.
Item 6H is text amendment 23005, request by the City of Lincoln Planning Director to amend the Lincoln Municipal Code Title 27 zoning ordinance to add collaborative living as a new conditional use by amending Chapter 27.02.040, see definitions, 27.06.080, group living use group, 27.62.050, conditional uses for group living, 27.67.040, parking requirements, special conditions, and other sections as necessary.
Director Carey.
Good evening, council members. David Carey, Director of the Planning Department, 555 South 10th Street. Appreciate some of your time this evening to talk about the topic of collaborative living. I do have some slides to go through for the benefit of everyone in the room and observing online. I think that'd be helpful just to kind of lay out the facts of what we're proposing, and certainly I will be available for any questions that you have. Steve Henriksen from my department is also here, as well as Tim C. from the Law Department. They have been very helpful in assisting in getting to this point in this process. I'd like to start out by just saying that the topic of collaborative living has been something that we've been discussing for quite a while now. I do want to state that I'm very appreciative of the process that we've been able to take to get feedback and input on this topic. At this point of the process, we have gotten comments and feedback from a wide spectrum of opinions on this topic, and I think that you'll probably hear a fairly wide spectrum here this evening as well. We certainly heard that at the Planning Commission hearing on May 31st. What that tells me is that this is not an easy topic to discuss and to come up with a right fit for Lincoln, Nebraska to come up with regulations for this use. But I do feel like we've come up with a good balance of issues here in this proposal. And so with that, I'll walk it through and see if you have any questions on what we are proposing this evening. Really, the background here is that it's become clear over the last several years that there is a need in the community for a use that addresses the topic of sober living homes. There are several of those homes that are active in the community. We have received a few different requests now under the reasonable accommodation topic, which is currently the only pathway for approval that we have on our books as far as city action is concerned. In addressing this, we felt like we needed to package this up so that we had a mechanism in order to discuss it as well as to enforce regulations that at this point in time there are no regulations addressing this specific use. And so we proceeded with working on this with several different departments as well as to have discussion with folks from different stakeholder groups to get a proposal that we feel confident in. Because it's not an existing use, we needed to start from scratch. We need to have a definition of what we mean by a collaborative living facility. And what we are proposing to you tonight is that it is a structure in which not less than 3 persons unrelated by blood, marriage, or adoption reside for the purposes of accommodating their shared disability. It's important to kind of break that down a little bit. The 3 persons is based on the definition of family that we have on the books. So whenever we have more than 3 unrelated living together, that typically kicks the use into a group living use. And that's something that we have several group living uses already identified, none of which match this type of use, which is why we're here tonight and talking about this. It also is important to note that we are being very upfront in saying that a sober living setting in a residential unit is for the purpose of helping meet the needs of those that are recovering from addiction to drugs and alcohol. That population is identified as a protected class through the Federal Fair Housing Law, and it's something that we need to be aware of as we talk about this topic. It's something that we've been considering all the way through, and we just need to be upfront in saying that there is a need out in the community for this type of living situation. And then the rest of the story is how best should Lincoln, Nebraska address it and to try to provide for some type of mechanism to allow for it in the best way possible and to basically address some of the impacts of that type of activity in any given housing structure. So with that definition and with that acknowledgement of the population that we are working for and with on this, the group living use group is one where it has those the several different people that are unrelated by blood or to typical definition of family. And so what we have decided and proposed here is that this would be a conditional use that would be similar to, but not at all the same as 3 other group living use conditional uses that are already in our code. Those would be domestic shelters, group homes, and transitional living facilities. All 3 of those existing conditional use group uses have varying levels of oversight and conditions of approval under the conditional use section. And I'll step back for a second and say that the conditional use, what that does is it allows for the approval of this use so long as the conditions that we as a city determine are needed are abided by. So that it does not require a public hearing, but it does require review to make sure that those conditions are being met. So that's in a nutshell what a conditional use is. And that's what we have in the books already for domestic shelters and group homes and transitional living facilities. The collaborative living facility would add a 4th conditional use to the group living uses. And again, what we are doing here is we're providing a pathway for approval with conditions. We do not have this identified in our current code. We felt like it was needed to work on this and provide the city this ability to regulate, but also have a pathway for approval for this new use. So the nuts and bolts of this that I'll go through fairly quickly, just to make sure that everyone is on the same page. So what we are proposing as a conditional use again is that in the AG, AGR, O1, O3, RT, B4, and B5 zoning districts, and all of the R1 through R8 residential zoning districts, this would be an allowed use with conditions. Those zoning districts do match the transitional living facilities, just for some comparison and some context. The crux of this topic, as we've been discussing it, is how many persons will we be allowing in any single-family structure. There is a wide range of examples throughout the country. I will be very clear to say that there is no single model to follow, which makes this more challenging. So it is something that we've spent quite a bit of time on and trying to make sure we right fit it for Lincoln, Nebraska. We think we've gotten close to that with this proposal, and we'll see where we land ultimately. But right now, what we're proposing is a cap of 10 individuals in any one single-family unit. That number is kind of a hybrid collection of a lot of different examples from around the country, but also in identifying that in a single-family home, we could have a large family living there. Often we can see that there could be 8, 9, 10 persons in that family. It's not typical that it goes above that. And so we landed at 10 because we felt like that was the upper limit of what could be there by right as a single-family setting. And the level of activity that could come with that as well would be comparable. Now, the rest of the story here and what the proposal has in it is that we have set this up to kind of be a scaled way of looking at how the numbers are set with how many persons are allowed in any given structure. And really what this is based on is the size of the lot. And the reason why we use the size of the lot is because that, first of all, that is a typical zoning tool to use. We use it in other sections of our code. It's used across the country for ways to identify how much activity should the city be allowing in any given lot, especially in the residential districts. So what the proposal includes in it, is we basically scale this up to starting with the lower density residential districts all the way up to the highest density districts where there would be more of the expectation that there would be multifamily units there and more activity happening in those districts. So in the AG, AGR, and R1 zoning districts, our lowest density zoning districts, we are proposing that there would be a requirement that there be 2,250 square feet from the lot per person. Then we step up to R2 and R3, which has a large amount of our footprint here in Lincoln are the R2 and R3. That would be a requirement of 1,500 square feet of lot area per resident. And then we go to the R4 and R5, excuse me, to 1,100 square feet per person. And then in the R6, R7, R8, again, that's where we start to get into more of the expectation that there's multifamily happening there. That is the 875 square feet per person. Now, it's nice to run numbers by everybody, but we need to break it down so that we can have an understanding of what that means. In Lincoln, Nebraska, we have several types of lot sizes, but there is a predominant size lot in the older areas of the city, and that equates to about a 7,100 square foot lot. So if you go to any of the older neighborhoods and you see the lots kind of lined up along the street, that's the majority of those lots are that size. Doesn't mean that they're all that size, but it's a good typical lot to consider. So what those square footage requirements per person break down to for that typical lot in Lincoln, Nebraska would be 4 persons in the R2 and R3 district, 6 persons allowed in the R4 and R5, and 8 persons allowed in the R6, R7, and R8. Now, not every lot is going to be that size, for one thing. There will be some, and we have looked around the community, there will be some larger lots. That's where the lid, the cap of 10 persons per lot comes into play if we happen to have a large lot in any particular zoning district, so that the cap would be at 10 in this proposal. There's some other variations of this. So in newer neighborhoods, the lots are a little bit larger, and so you typically would have a 9,000 to 10,000 square foot lot, and they're typically an R3 underlying zoning in a lot of the PUDs and CUPs that are out there. That would allow 6 persons per lot in a typical sense out in those newer areas. And then R1 is a little bit different just because that's a lower density and typically larger lots. Those are also typically around 9,000 square feet or larger. And that, under this proposal, that would allow 4 persons.
Do you want questions at the end or as we go?
I was hoping to hear from the director and then maybe move into public testimony and then do questions, if that works.
Nope, that's fine.
Okay.
Another way to break that down is that when you look at the minimum lot sizes for those zoning districts and the residential zoning districts, all of them under this proposal would start with at least allowing 4 persons per lot under the minimum lot size, which makes some sense because we already would allow 3 this proposal at least gets it to 4 for that type of group living use. So that's just another way to think about how the proposal would work. There is a spacing requirement that's proposed as part of this. Again, spacing for some type of group living is a fairly typical measure of regulation. In this one, we are proposing a 1,000 foot separation from other collaborative living facilities in the R1 through R4 districts. Those are the lowest density residential districts. It's proposed to be 500 feet in the R5 through R8. Again, those higher districts, the R5 is where you can start to have multifamily. The expectation of more activity is you start with that with those higher residential zoning districts. To give some perspective on that as well, 1,000 feet is slightly more than 3 typical city block lengths. And then the 500 is slightly less than 2. The typical block here in Lincoln is about 300 feet. So that just gives some perspective on how much of a distance that is. There would be no spacing requirement in the non-residential districts, just to be clear on that as well. There is a parking requirement proposed. The parking requirement is 1 space per 2 residents required to be on the property. So not counting on-street parking spaces. This has got to be on the park. And again, just to kind of in the real world, what that means is that if you have a 2-stall garage, that would be 2 spaces right there, and then the driveway typically would allow for another 2 spaces, so that you would get 4 with that. And then the 4 spaces that would be provided there would allow for up to 8 residents in that hypothetical. So just to keep in mind what that means. Part of our thought process here on the parking is that the 1 space per 2 residents, or 0.5 per person. The idea here is with a combination of having the person limitation based on the square footage of the lot and the zoning district that it's in. We are trying to balance this out so that the impact on the neighborhood is similar to what could be there with a single family activity. And that can be lower with less people living in a house. That's kind of obvious. The same thing with the parking requirement, because first of all, if you allow only 4 or 6 or 8 persons, you don't have to provide as many parking spaces. But at the same time, we do not want to physically alter a single family lot too much to alter what it looks like and how it acts in a residential neighborhood. So again, the balancing act of this proposal, trying to allow for the use to happen with some of those conditions and to physically keep it consistent with an existing residential neighborhood. One more piece of information before I wrap up here is that the building permit process is basically what would be used going through Building and Safety Department to basically check off that the requirements, the conditions of the use are being met. And so that would be basically how the process would be set up. I want to just kind of step back a little bit, saying kind of how we got to this point. So on February 13th, we did discuss this at the Mayor's Neighborhood Roundtable meeting. From that point forward, we had several meetings, different people representing this proposal. Went to several different meetings with residents of existing facilities, neighborhood associations, basically just interested individuals, and community advocacy groups. That is where there was a great amount of information shared with me and others, and was a very wide range of opinion on this as well, ranging from let's not have any of these regulations to we need more regulations. So again, we do feel like this became and is a balanced approach to this. It provides for some context for how we deal with this use that isn't available to us yet today. This was approved 9-0 by the Planning Commission on May 31st, and it is therefore before you today for your consideration. Again, it's based on a known need in the community. In my opinion, we have to do something to try to both regulate and allow this use in our community. So with that, and with that explanation of the proposal, I am available, as well as Steve and Tim as needed, to answer your questions.
Very good. Thank you, Director. I think that we will move directly into public testimony and take questions after public testimony. It's almost 7 o'clock right now, and I know that the majority of folks here are here to testify on this particular item. So if it's okay, I would like to just keep moving forward and move through testimony, if that works for people. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Madam Clerk, would you reiterate some of our rules regarding testimony, and we'll get started.
Okay. Those that are here to testify on this item, as a reminder, testimony is limited to 5 minutes per speaker. Speakers should begin by stating their name, address, organization, or group, and state if you are speaking in favor, opposition, or neutral for the item. The clerks will use our light system to help aid your timing for your testimony. We have 2 monitors here for that to assist you, and speakers are able to come up and take any available seats up front if you're coming to testify, and both microphones are available for testimony. The lights will appear on the monitors provided. When you start your testimony, green will indicate your start, yellow is going to indicate your 1 minute remaining, and red is going to indicate that your time is up. Okay.
All right, very good. Do we have a list of testifiers, Madam Clerk?
No, we do not.
Okay, very good. So
There were some at the back door.
do we have a sign-up sheet at the back door by chance?
It's just for a record.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Okay, very good. So anyone who would like to testify, please go ahead and come forward. We'll take 2 people at a time. Yep, come on down. We'll have one over here and another over here, and we'll just go back and forth. If that sounds good. Sir, you're recognized.
Good evening, council folks. My name is Mark Broman. That's Brohman. I live at 2637 Washington Street. You'll remember me from the Michael's House fiascos that occurred on Washington. That's what got me involved in this. I'm here tonight to support the collaborative living. It's not perfect. It's a good start. I would like to see 1 parking place per 1 person rather than 1 for every 2. In the case across the street from us, they had 8 individuals living in the house, and the parking was a nightmare. Most of the people didn't own a car. It was their friends coming to pick them up, taking them to work, and coming to visit, plus staff members coming. So I think that 1-to-1 parking is a much better solution. The other thing would be the spacing requirement. You've got the 500 and 1,000-foot distances, and that applies only to other collaborative living facilities. I think it should apply to all of the group homes, transitional facilities, those types of places, because you could get a group home next to an Oxford house, next to one of these conditional housing. So you could have 3 right in a row, and we've seen that in our neighborhood. There are 18 Oxford houses around the city of Lincoln. We've got them a corner over on the A Street, one catty corner next to another Oxford house. So I would like to see that spacing apply to all the different types of group homes, not just the collaborative living. But again, I support them coming forward with this. It's a good start. It's a lot better than we have. I think most people are going to come in. The folks are in this for money. The organizations are in this to make money. They're going to come under reasonable accommodations. They're going to say, I can't make enough money with this. This is only 4, 5, 6 people. They want the 8, 9, 10, 12 people, 14 like the one Oxford house. So I think most of them are still going to come in under reasonable accommodations. So I don't think many people are going to come in under this because it only allows them to get 1 or 2. But I'm glad we have this on the books because we can justify turning down folks for reasonable accommodation by saying, hey, we have this other permit out there that you can go for. So I think it helps the city by having a collaborative living designation. Then the last thing was, there was talk about, these houses, limiting them to 10 people because that can be a family of 10. We've got neighbors that have 4, 5, 6 kids, but they come and they go. Kids grow up, they drive for 3 or 4 years and they're gone. So you don't have a family for 20 or 30 years having 10 cars in front of their house. You will in these cases because they encourage people to get jobs and get cars. And we're all supportive in our neighborhood of these types of homes. We just are concerned about the numbers. So again, back to the number of cars allowed and off-street parking, I think 1-to-1 is a much more reasonable case. With that, I'd answer any questions, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Any questions? All right, thank you. Come on down. Anyone else who would like to come on up for our second one? Hello.
Hello, I'm Carmen Maurer. I am, address is 1929 C Street, and I'm the Administrative Vice President for the Near South Neighborhood Association. Our president would have liked to have been here tonight in support of neighborhood concerns, but he is working out of town, so you've got me and Kathy. You have all received the Near South position statement endorsed by 4 other neighborhood associations. My time tonight will only allow me to raise a couple of points while some of my neighborhood colleagues will address the balance of our concerns. I encourage you to refer to the position statement for detail on all of these matters. The first point I would bring up is that I would ask that the council make it clear that we expect that legal compliance take place before occupancy of the facility. And we ran into that over the past year where we had 3 different facilities come before you. They were already The residents were in them. There were, and so it puts you in a difficult position. It puts us in a difficult position. It put the residents in a difficult position. And so I would hope that we would make it abundantly clear that we're going to comply first and then have people move in. The other point that I would like to talk to you about tonight is reasonable accommodation, reminding all of you that whatever it is that you may approve for collaborative living, it can be waived by a reasonable accommodation request. And so there was some, I thought, misunderstanding maybe at the Planning Commission about this issue that we raised. We would agree, we all agree that substance abuse recovery is a disability under federal law. And we also recognize that the city has a broadly stated reasonable accommodation evaluation process. But from our perspective, we think that that evaluation process simply meets minimal or merely minimal standards. And so we are requesting that the reasonable accommodation evaluation process be better, clearer, more transparent, more effective with respect to evaluating the request for a reasonable accommodation. Director Carey at the Planning Commission stated that he had indeed spoken to a number of residents and operators and owners of facilities. And so you can correct me, Director Carey, if I misquote anything that you said, but my understanding was that he, in the course of those conversations, that this model, say the Oxford House model, if we can refer to it as that, actually is effective for many residents. But he said it is not for everyone. And that's where a good reasonable accommodation evaluation process comes into play. It helps craft a solution for those people that it's not good for everyone. And so this is not, a reasonable accommodation is not a one-size-fits-all kind of program. For example, architectural design standards in the ADA are, I mean, a door is supposed to be so wide, the grade on a ramp is supposed to be a certain grade. But when you're talking about reasonable accommodation, those are unique solutions to address an individual's disability. I mean, if I have time, I'll give you a quick example. When I was at the University of Nebraska, a student would come in to us and say, I need an extra hour to take my test because I have an information processing challenge. We would sit down with that student, and we'd confirm that they indeed had that disability. There'd be an exchange of information, and we'd maybe say, darn it, that's right, an hour will level the playing field for you. But that exchange of information might also indicate that they needed more time or they needed less time. So the solution was strategically crafted for that person's disability. That's what a reasonable accommodation process should do. If the city fails to appropriately evaluate the accommodation fit for the disabled person, it increases risk to the individual requesting the accommodation. It increases risk to the other residents in the facility and to the neighbors. And I would have to assume that given that, we would think that maybe it increases the legal risk to the city. Our position statement starting at page 3 provides information and sample guidances on what a good, reasonable accommodation evaluation process should look like. I encourage you to review that with care. We had genuinely hoped to support the city's proposal. However, without engagement or further discussion with the city about the concerns we've raised, we are not ready to support this proposal as presently drafted. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to our next testifier, and if I could have someone else come up here to our podium, and we'll follow right after there. Kathy.
Good evening. Kathy Welkin. I'm the secretary of the Near South Neighborhood Association, 1942 A Street, Lincoln. I'm going to give you a little bit of a historical perspective on the work that we do. We're celebrating our 50 years. As I leave, look at the back of my shirt. 50 years ago, the Near South Neighborhood Association was formed by forward-thinking citizens concerned with zoning issues even then, 50 years ago. Single-family homes were being demolished and replaced with slip-in apartments. In 1980, the NSNA helped create the Historic Preservation Commission, which adopted ordinances allowing landmark designation for properties and districts. NSNA educated community residents and policymakers on the value of our historic properties properties in their neighborhoods. In 1980, Mount Emerald became the first landmark district recognized in Lincoln, followed by Franklin Heights in 1995. NSNA helped create residential conservation overlay districts to implement basic design standards to show that while older areas may not rise to the level of historic landmark, they share a layout and design that new development should recognize. 21 neighborhood associations joined with NSNA in that effort. Concerns expressed in the Focused Area Action Plan of June 2006 stated items we're still dealing with today: deferred maintenance by investor owners and absentee landlords, increased density, perception that there is a high incidence of crimes against persons and property, environmental blight. Even as far back as the 70s, Near South was concerned by the growing number of group homes and the feeling that the neighborhood was saturated. 50% of Lincoln's group homes were located in the Near South, even then. The inclusion of significant amendments into the City County Comprehensive Plan adopted in 2002 specifically dealt with zoning in older neighborhoods, stating significant intensification could be detrimental to the neighborhoods and be beyond infrastructure capabilities, which encourage changes in the current balance of housing types that should be revised to retain the existing character of the neighborhoods and to encourage maintenance of established older neighborhoods, not their extensive conversion to more intensive uses. NSNA has been a lead organization in countless actions because of the caring and daring foresight of its members, some of which have served on our board for decades. We have significant strengths, but with growth challenges, we have significant concerns. We continue to work with and rely upon Lincoln City government to listen to our concerns, which are backed by countless volunteer hours of meetings and research. NSNA holds many public events every year, funds from which are dedicated to the needs that come to our attention. This year, we sponsored our 24th biannual Mother's Day Tour of Homes, which began in 1977. Funds amassed from the past 2 years of events will be donated to Peach Park as we again dedicate our commitment to our 7 Near South parks. NSNA helped create this little children's pocket park in 1979 and have continued to contribute volunteer hours and funding to uphold its integrity and safety. On August 12th, we will present a check in the amount of $35,000 to Parks Director Maggie Stuckey Ross, following our gift of $40,000 to Breda and Near South Park in 2019. $75,000 given to Lincoln City Parks is significant. These and past funding of neighborhood needs showcase our longstanding commitment to our community. We ask that you consider the past 50-year history of NSNA and the contributions made by hundreds of members and neighbors as we deal with yet another challenge in zoning laws, regulations, and their impact on our homes and families. We do not waste your time with small asks, but when we come to you and work with you, as we have in the past 2 years on this issue, we are serious. The NSNA, along with Weatherby Country Club, East Campus, and Irvingdale, have joined forces to request specific changes in your proposed collaborative living zoning language. Only you can turn our recommendations into Lincoln City Code. With your vote, you change the course of our oldest, most densely populated neighborhood in Lincoln, Nebraska. With your vote, you change our future. Thank you for your kind consideration.
Questions for Kathy? Yes, Councilman.
What specific changes to the proposal are you looking for?
They were listed in the letter that was sent April 10th. So we had concerns about the numbers. We had concerns about the parking. We had concerns about the spacing.
Kathy, some of our members weren't seated April 10th, and so what we'll do is that I'll have the council secretary go ahead and pull that and redistribute it again, just so everyone's up to date with that, because 3 of our council members were not yet seated here on the city council in April.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I did assume that they would be given all historic documents to get up to speed on what we'd be discussing today.
We will reiterate that. I apologize for that.
Okay, thank you so much. Any other questions?
Any other questions for Kathy?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kathy. Please, go ahead, and if another person would like to come, you can stay there if you want, or, yep.
Sure, I'll use this one.
Go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I too assumed that you would have the document that we all approved of. My name is Mary Schwab. I have lived at 3510 Woods Avenue for 47 years in the Witherby neighborhood. Witherby neighborhood this year is 20 years strong. And I am treasurer, and I've been involved with Witherby neighborhood for all 20 years. Prior to that, I lived in Near South. My parents and my kids have lived in Near South. I stand before you today to ask sincerely that you consider the citizens who are requesting more. This proposal from the Lincoln Planning Department has nothing to support enforcement. Neighbors calling the police on their neighbors is not enough. My parents moved to their forever home near Lincoln High in 1963. In the 1970s and 80s, 8 six-plex slip-ins were built within 1 block of their house. Drug dealing, loud parties, and damage to their property followed. My father called the police many times, and after being physically threatened, now in their 80s with poor health, in the 1990s, they moved to a new neighborhood. The value of their home had decreased. I tell you this because those slip-in apartments were operating under the same lack of enforcement as collaborative living homes. These group homes are a rental business, commercially lucrative for the owners. Group homes can well afford to share the cost of assuring legal compliance and oversight. Many businesses, my former wig and styling salon included, operated under a license with annual inspections under the law. I ask you for certificates of compliance. The residents deserve more. My stepson, addicted at 14, was released from inpatient treatment and was supposed to find healing in a sober group living home here in Lincoln. He found that other residents were not sober, and someone right there in the home sold him more drugs. With no program, resident staff, no laws that require compliance, and a safe environment, there was nothing that would support safe and sober living. This is what you have before you. Will you require the business owners who are landlords to these residents to provide a safe, licensed environment? Kathy covered the fact that five neighborhood associations have signed on to that document you will see. A large percent of group homes will be in older inner city neighborhoods, those without HOA covenants that supersede the laws of the city. Some covenants do not allow rentals, so they won't be able to have these group homes. When in reaching for an answer that would help me understand why these changes we request had not already been made, I asked, why does Lincoln Lancaster County continue to set this type of program up for failure? Why are there not protections for both neighbors and residents built into this group living plan? I was told, well, that's the way it's always been done. Neighbors' complaints and police calls are still the way it's handled. Is that a good enough answer for you? Obviously, it is not for the citizens of this community. Is this the time to find a way to make changes that support the community of inner city neighborhood and the residents of the homes? When neighborhood association representatives were asked at the February 13th Mayor's Roundtable by Planning Director Carey to bring neighbors' requests to the city-county planning process, I thought that was a really honest ask. When we requested a follow-up meeting between these 5 neighborhoods, we were informed the only avenue for our concerns was you, the city council. I question the seriousness of the request for our input, but now that you hear it, please listen to us. I respectfully ask you, our elected city council, to please consider our concerns you hear today. I am not required to be the city's lawyers, planners, and ADA evaluators, but I can ask that this city council will bring us a plan of oversight that ensures safety, compliance with the law, and good housing for all. May I ask that those in attendance in support of my comments please rise? Thanks to all of you for your good work.
Thank you. Any questions for Mary? All right, seeing none, thank you. If there's next testifier would like to come up and get on the other side, that'd be great. Wayne.
Hi, Council. This is Wayne Mortensen. I'm the CEO of NeighborWorks Lincoln at 2530 Q Street. That's Mortensen. And I rise in support of the ordinance on behalf of the leadership and board of directors of NeighborWorks Lincoln, who, when at our best, we expand access to affordable housing and inclusive neighborhoods citywide, including the 5 neighborhoods that just rose. I think there's a lot of good feedback in there that's offered from a very good place. We're speaking specifically to the zoning ordinance, which can't necessarily control the operation of these facilities, which needs to be part of the dialogue, hopefully successively. We're here to support the ordinance because we have people in this community that are living with these conditions, whether or not they are accommodated in the zoning code or not. And if we can accommodate these individuals, we as a community can succeed and be more inclusive. After my comment of support, my colleague Chelsea Eggenberger will speak in a neutral position. We were pleased to be part of the facilitation process, but I'm speaking in support of the ordinance. Chelsea will give you some more insight on the process itself these last few months. We support the approach by the planning department as a reasonable compromise, although to be fair, I think advocates for this collaborative living approach would rightly be a little frustrated that the square footage is likely a little conservative. If you look at the square footages in each of those residential districts, you'll find that it's going to be very difficult to find a site to ever reach the maximum amount that is allowed by law. We feel that 0.5 parking per occupant is a best practice. If you would allow any more than 0.5, you will turn these residential lots into parking lots. You'd have to gravel or pave most of the available open space to accommodate 4 to 6 parking spaces on a typical lot. And then finally, 1 facility per block or street is probably a good idea. It seems reasonable. When you add other facilities to the mix, you can only draw so many concentric circles within the city limit. And more importantly, I think, is the proximity of these facilities to Lincoln's limited transit system, our job centers, educational centers, and walkable retail and grocery. That becomes very difficult to imagine these group facilities being places that allow people to thrive if you continue to push them further and further away from the core of the city. These individuals, as I mentioned earlier, already live with us, but without the necessary supports. If they can be accommodated in our community, we as a community as a whole can thrive. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, I believe that this policy will likely not necessarily slow down the public accommodation requests, but it's a great step in the right direction for a community that, like NeighborWorks, is seeking to accommodate its residents successfully and inclusively. And it's a community that we are proud to be a part of and proud to be working on these issues alongside. If you have any questions, happy to respond to those.
Any questions for Wayne? Yes, sir.
I have 2 questions.
Sure.
I appreciate the comments about being inclusive. Do you think that the proposal that's in front of us today denies folks that would live in a facility like this, denies them the ability to be in newer neighborhoods compared to some of our established neighborhoods?
I believe that we have a system that has allowed for neighborhoods to bow up and refuse the location of these facilities within their confines. The residential districts called out for in the zoning policy would fundamentally limit the number of people that would be able to accommodate in these larger neighborhoods with the larger residential tracts. So the bigger the lot, the lower the zoning code, residential code, and the fewer the people that would be accommodated in those areas. And so that would be our concern, is that the vast majority of communities in Lincoln would not be able to reach a critical mass necessary to support these facilities.
Because when I look at it, it's interesting to see. It seems like more folks would be allowed in the northern neighborhoods compared to the southern neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And as someone who represents northern neighborhoods, it's a little concerning that folks would be denied the ability to live on the southern side of town. I guess the other statement, or I guess, I don't know if it's a question, but just a statement that I would like for you to respond to is, when I first got elected 4 or 5 years ago, I first met with NeighborWorks, and this is before you came on, and I had a really interesting conversation with the staff there, and they said that NeighborWorks' official position was to not repeal or to not change anything that allows less than 3 unrelated people living together. I had a conversation with the staff then, and it was a really uncomfortable one because I said I'm very sensitive to the definition of family, and that is the no more than 3 unrelated people living together, is that too constraining? NeighborWorks, and what I was told was the position of NeighborWorks at the time was that nope, we have to have only 3 unrelated, no more than 3 unrelated people living together at a time. Is that NeighborWorks still the same position? Has it changed? Can you just kind of respond to that?
No, completely fair question. I am not aware of a printed policy to that effect. It might have been a guideline that they were following at the time. Since that period, I think the housing crisis and our understanding of severe and persistent mental health challenges citywide, as well as substance abuse and the decline of social capital, have all created the pretext by which innovative solutions are necessary. And I think we understand now through our work in the south of downtown and other neighborhoods around the core of the city that this problem is a pressing one and needing formal addressing by the city of Lincoln. So I would say that it's no longer our policy, nor do we probably believe at this point that the city should be dictating whether people are related or not in a housing facility.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilman, all finished? Okay, very good. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Councilman Dune.
Who are you representing?
NeighborWorks Lincoln.
Neighborhood Works Lincoln?
NeighborWorks Lincoln. Yep.
And what do you do? What do they do?
Since 1986, NeighborWorks Lincoln has been the foremost provider of for-sale affordable housing in the state of Nebraska. Every year we take about 250 Lincolnites through our home buyer preparation curriculum, and we help about 80 families achieve their dream of first-time home ownership.
What's your definition of an affordable lot?
Oh, not that. Not what we heard earlier. I think 25,000 has been our historical limit on lots, but we've had to get creative. For instance, we bought a couple $60,000 lots and put 2 units there, duplex style, where there was formerly 1. So we've had to get creative, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Good. All right, very good.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it.
Hello, I'm Chelsea Egenberger. I'm the Community Engagement Director at NeighborWorks Lincoln, and our address is 2530 Q Street. Prior to coming on as a Community Engagement Director about 10 months ago, my background is in social work. I've worked as a case manager, an adult guardian, and various community settings. And so certainly that has impacted both our engagement on this issue and also provided me some historical context to what we're discussing. One of the things I just want to mention is I want to say thank you to the City of Lincoln, to Director Carey, Councilperson Washington, and John Carlson from the Mayor's Office for working with us to center those most impacted by this zoning code proposal. And those are the residents of current collaborative living facilities. I also want to thank the neighborhood organizations and associations that have bound together and talked about this issue and talked about how it impacted them and come up with a statement. We know that kind of organizing and that helps us understand more inclusively how this impacts everyone across our neighborhoods. But part of the reason we reached out to the planning department to help in doing community engagement with this is not only because the city provides us funding to do community building, but also because we saw an opportunity to help promote equity and raising in the voices of folks who are most impacted in this situation. And so some of the things I wanted to kind of reflect here is just some of the things that we learned. And that's part of the reason why I'm testifying in a neutral position is I just want to present to you more of like what I've learned and heard in this process. So when we got together with Collaborative Living Facility members, we heard that they're often looking for things that we all are looking for in our neighborhoods and our communities and housing. They're looking for walkability. They're looking for welcoming neighbors. They're certainly looking for affordability, and they're looking for a network of support. So I also want to reflect that this issue is complicated. I think David Carey did a great job of like kind of reflecting some of the complications, because here we have a land management tool of zoning codes that is being used to address something that a lot of folks are testifying that goes beyond land use. And so I want to reflect that it is complicated because there are many different models that are operating as collaborative living facilities, and that there are certainly concerns of exploitation that happen in our community, and that there are concerns regarding safety. And some of those things certainly showed up in our conversations with the residents of current collaborative living facilities. So as I mentioned, the zoning code only really impacts that use of land and not the services or the oversight that these homes provide. So I just want to provide that clarity, because we often saw that, yeah, maybe we want to see a zoning code that goes farther in addressing how these homes are run or how that they are approved and that oversight is provided. And that is just not how the zoning code is structured. And so we wanted to call that out as basically that this zoning code will never impact how services are operated and how these homes are structured and run. But we did learn that from engaging with collaborative living facilities that the number of occupants certainly not only impacts the affordability of that home, and the sustainability of that model itself, but also by creating a larger network of peer support. So a lot of these models are relying on peer support. And you may have heard of AA. It's best practice in a lot of places, and it is a peer support model. So I just want to highlight that not only is the number of occupants keenly tied to the affordability, it also very much is keenly tied to the peer support that we heard that folks rely on in their ability to get sober in these collaborative living facilities. So we also know that the number of unhoused residents here in Lincoln has doubled in the last year, and that a majority of those individuals live with severe persistent mental illness and or substance use disorders. So my final reflection is that we know that we need more affordable housing, and we need many tools in which to navigate the challenges that exist in our community. And community living or collaborative living facilities certainly play a role in that. And we know that there is a need in our community, and I don't believe anyone here is denying that. However, what I see with this proposal is that the majority of or actually all of the collaborative living facilities that are currently in existence that have not gotten reasonable accommodation would not be able to operate at the levels that they currently do underneath these zoning code proposals, and at least 3 of them would not be able to accommodate more than 3 individuals, which is what is allowed by law. I see I'm at 5 minutes, and I will stop there.
Very good. Thank you so much. Any questions? All right, seeing none, thank you. Oh, Councilwoman, I'm sorry, did you have a question?
I do. Chelsea, thank you for coming up and providing your comments. But the last thing you said left me with a question, and so I don't actually expect you to answer the question, but I'm going to raise this just so I don't forget it. So my question has to do with, we know that there are the Oxford House, I'm going to talk about them, because they advertise on their own website that we have more houses here than the ones that they've brought before us asking for a permit. Now they're just self-disclosing this, and you're saying that the parameters that we've just proposed, that we're setting up to propose here, would disallow them from operating at all? Or
no, operating at their current occupancy rates, and then 3 of them would not, following the zoning code proposal, they would not be able to just apply and get approved. They would have to seek fair housing accommodation to even get to up to 4 residents. Because of the zoning district that they're in and the size of their lot, it limits at least 3 of the current ones to just 3 residents.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. If we could have our next testifier come up here and take that podium spot. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Dean Cole. I live at 2644 Washington Street, Lincoln, Nebraska, 68502. I lived just 4 feet from a transitional home that was called Michael House. And I think, too, you've heard me speak before, some of you folks here on this, and I'm not going to repeat a lot, but one thing I think, lessons learned from all of this. One of those big lessons learned is definitely we need to have that where to make sure before anybody starts moving residents into these facilities that they first go through that application and make sure that they comply before we get those folks in there. I know that it's difficult. That's been thrown at me. I was like feeling like I was in a tuning fork or like Bambi on the interstate when I observed what was going on in that facility. And like I mentioned, every person that came to that facility, I introduced myself, I welcomed them to the neighborhood, I gave them my business card, and I even said, anything that you need, you can contact me. Of those I got to know 8, 4 of them I got to know very closely. What was going on inside that house, and I know I've had this thrown at me, you can't regulate, or we as an ordinance can't have the management of it. But yet that still was a terrible disservice that was going on with those folks inside that house. Because again, some of them who wanted to get well did not really have an access or who to go to or who to trust to go into that process to get well. When I talked to parole, they got to know me by my first name. I called a lot. And again, what they would do to me too is, or to our community, is that the regulations of the house is not our responsibility. That's a city issue. Again, then when I talk to city folks, the regulation of how it's operated is not our issue. But the problem is that a lot of people got hurt over this whole process emotionally. They used this thing that it was so therapeutic. But I, as an eyewitness living 4 feet away from and observed what was going on, there was no therapy going on in that place. Matter of fact, more people were damaged. The only reason, too, that I think that one of the reasons why that this process why they moved out for the time being, they may be moving back in, I don't know. The house no longer has folks from corrections, is when I went to parole and made them aware of what was going on. The parole staff had not communicated any of that to the parole board. What I say is what needs to be done is this, too, is that we have got to get some sort of forum or something together, is where the city, where corrections and parole and probation works with the city instead of just passing the buck, and works with us so we can come up with some solutions here, because this is not going to go away. And it's so important. But I can tell you right now from experience, this is not hearsay. And a matter of fact, I have a call in parole here last week, and they still said they were going to have someone call me today, and I have not got a call back from parole. That's how everything operates. And with that kind of lack of communication, we can't continue operating like that. So something has to be done to force that. And I know that's maybe not all your responsibility, but I just want to make that aware, because this is just, it's going to continue being a mess. We're still going to have problems with parking, because that's not a big, that's a big issue too, because you have people, even though you say 2 parking stall per resident, you still have folks who can't drive, who have people come and pick them up for work and all of that, which causes creation problems within a neighborhood. There's just some big issues that we've got to draw the state in to help us to do this. But right now, the attitude of them is not our problem. And I've seen it. I've related this to you folks. I've seen where the bus, I could identify every one of those poor people that come in there. Here comes the prison bus. They dropped them off. They had their garbage bag of their own personal belongings and some toiletry stuff, and they were just left there. And even though I called parole, talked to parole, all of that stuff, nothing got done until we had to even go above that. Why people still were allowed to continue living into that place. So what I'm saying is we've got to, as a community, we have got to work together. We've got to get the state corrections and parole and probation. All of us has got to get to the table and come out with some sort of guidelines. We landed a man in the moon in '69. We can surely come up with something that we can agree upon, hopefully, or compromise to make this better for everybody, not only the people that live in these homes, but folks who are neighbors and folks who have loved ones that are in those homes. So with that, I just again want to thank the council and everybody. There's been a lot of hard work put in place. Again, I agree with Mary, but also on this thing, I support this moving forward on this planning, and everybody's done a lot of hard work on this. So this is a beginning here for us all. Any questions?
Any questions? Yes, Councilman.
Yes, Tom.
When you say you
Councilman Duden, congratulations on your election.
Thank you. When you say you've lived there 4 feet away from this house.
Yes, sir.
Have you seen crimes take place?
Yes, sir.
What kind of crimes?
I've seen drugs being dropped off, which again, I call, again, this is another thing I learned, you know me, way back. I went through the process too, when in there, I thought, when I called, I says, what happens if we see anything when you were told, well, we're supposed to go through parole. I didn't want to bother the police department. because they're our responsibility, because I'm hearing too how, not a lot of friends in the police department, how they're overloaded and everything. So I called parole on a couple of different instances that I personally observed, and sure enough, then something was done. But yet none of that stuff too is related back to their administration or anything. They drug their feet all the time until I had to threaten to say, I'm gonna call the police, you know. So I learned a lesson too now, that I am not calling parole officers anymore. I am calling the police on everything, a parking thing, any minor thing, any kind of issues that we wanted to address. I called parole thinking we'd work together and they'd work with the owner of the house. No, it did not happen. So what I'm doing now is going to call the police, because again, it was thrown back into my face. Oh, there were no really complaints to the police on this issue. Knew nothing about it. So I have learned the game. Another thing too, and I'm going to be honest with you too, and I don't want to sound vindictive, but I'm so close to that place that when they had a sewage issue because of so many people living in that place, had a sewage backup and had problems. The only way they could get there to really address it was had to use my driveway. Okay, the maintenance gentleman I worked with, a nice guy, and again, if I had to be a real jerk, it would have been the residents that had been impacted. They needed to use my driveway to handle this sewage issue. That man that owns the facility did not even have the professional courtesy to call and thank me and all of that stuff. That's what we're dealing with here. And I know you can't regulate it, but that's the fact of life, and that's what upsets people on trying to solve problems. And who do you go to get them solved? And it's about people being responsible and treating others right and with respect. And the experience I've had with Mr. Mike Corrado, I'm pronouncing out his name, is not been. We would not have a lot of these problems if he would be responsible and caring about the people that he was providing the facility to. That's why we're here. Is that these people, some of them, I don't want to stereotype them, some of them, he was charging $750 for people to live, 4 of them in a bed, in one bedroom. $750 wasn't giving them the services. So that's going to continue going on unless we put some teeth into some things to regulate that better.
Councilman, any other questions?
Yes.
I'm glad you learned the lesson that if you don't call the police, there's no record of it. It's the same thing as it didn't happen.
That's right.
So you do have to call.
Yes.
And anybody in here that lives next to a facility like that, if you don't call and report the problems, nobody's going to know what's going on out there. And the police will take some action.
Yes.
If they know about it. So that's important. So
one other thing too now, and what I mentioned too is Michael. I just want. Okay.
I apologize. Your testimony time is limited. You're free to answer questions. Okay. However, I apologize.
Yeah, that's all I have.
All right. Very good. Any other questions for our testifier? I apologize.
That's no problem. All right. Thank you for the time.
All right. Very good. Thank you. All right.
Hi.
Go ahead. If our next testifier would like to come up and take the podium and be ready, that'd be great. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Jim Brewer. I live at 600.
Yes.
I live in.
Sir, just take it easy.
This is close to my heart. I'm one of those people you're talking about. When I was younger, I'm old now, and what I hear here, what they're predicting, I would have any one of these people live next door to me if they had a system to within themselves to take care of themselves. Without that system, that house will fall to pieces. I worked with 3,200 men and women over a 5.5-year period. We took them to church, we fed them, we had classes, and many of them today have done really good. I've even had a couple pedophiles. I can't say any more than that because I promised him I wouldn't say who. Thank you. But if I was in a system like what they're offering, this collaborative housing without someone being there to be in charge, I would have so many ways of breaking the law and making my neighbors miserable because I'm not paying attention to what the law says. The cop's going to be there all the time. And they're going to be wanting to know, Jim, what have you been up to, you know? Well, you know what I've been up to. But I don't do that anymore. I try to help people. And even yet today, I try to help people. But if you talk to any kid from Boys Town that has gone through the system, from murder to robbery to sex, they're all good kids today. But we had a system. And we had to obey the system. Because you know what, if we didn't obey the system, that person would be all over my tail. Because you know why? I got that person in trouble. I have to be, it's like the military, you got to be accountable. I'm going to die so this person can live. And you have to have something to control these guys. Because if you have nothing, they're going to go to the drugs, they're going to go to prostitution, they're going to go to stealing, they're going to go to whatever they want to do, booze. And I have all the respect in the world for the 3,200 men and women that I worked with, for they all tried. Some couldn't make it. It was just, there was no way they were going to do it. And I couldn't help them. Part of it, they didn't want help. And the only way, is have someone there to help them. Do you know Bud Christensen by any chance? Okay, well, he started Bridges to Hope originally. I ran Bridges to Hope after Bud got sick. And now Bridges to Hope is going to build that little Minnie. She's a wonderful lady. She's doing great work. She's helping people. That little organization is going to be very, very well run. But if there's no one there to manage it and make them accountable, it's tough to make them accountable because they know all the tricks. You're not going to surprise them with anything. So I think it's a great thing, but I think it sucks the way they're putting it together. And to not go further into this and get more accountability, it's not going to work. And it's going to make a lot of people unhappy, sad. It's going to injure people. There will be fights. There will be all kinds of things go on. So I ask you to push it a little harder, a little further, and a little bit more accountability. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Any questions for our testifier?
Thank you.
All right, thank you for coming forward. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
If there's someone else who would like to testify, please come forward and grab one of the unoccupied podiums.
Okay. Before I start, I'd like to clear up two things that you were told earlier, and I don't know if you can get this.
If you can just hold on for just one moment until you can move to the microphone, that would be helpful.
Okay, sorry.
Yep. Nope, thank you.
Too many years of doing TV. If I could spend 30 seconds before I get into my presentation, I want to address a couple things you heard earlier. One is, this is the shot of South...
All of your comments are under the 5-minute time period, so just so you're aware.
This
Madam
is
Clerk.
the shot of South 26th Street at 7 o'clock this morning. This is an R7 neighborhood. Each of the houses on each side of those streets have 4 to 6 parking spaces behind them. The places that are not filled with a car are driveways. Let me know how you're going to put more cars in that already. That's R7. That's going to have the highest residential. Okay, second, in regard to the issue of parole, When the transitional housing started, I checked into the people that run those are all licensed by the state of Nebraska, specifically the Supreme Court through the probation department or the parole department. I contacted the court. They do not supervise those people whatsoever. Once they get those licenses, there is no way to get them out unless they do something criminal and somebody takes them to court. So that's your transitional housing. That's who's running it. Okay, on to the main thing. My name is Jane Sebi. I live at 320 South 29th Street in the Woods Park neighborhood. I have a lovely older 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. Unfortunately, the bedrooms and bathrooms are all on the second floor, and I just turned 70. Suppose I put my house on the market, and a lovely young couple with a young teenage daughter are interested, and hey, they're willing to meet my price. They love the atmosphere of the house, the nearby school, the history of the block. They envision taking walks through the neighborhood, participating in Lincoln High events, and using the recreational facilities in the adjacent Woods Park. Am I legally obligated to tell them that a block and a half away there's a transitional living facility with 3 to 4 unsupervised felons out on parole? People that both the Department of Corrections and the parole board feel need to have a little more supervision before they're completely released? I personally know about this house because I was one of the people that worked to get the transitional regulations established that we now have. How about the halfway house 2 blocks south of me for kids aging out of foster care? I learned about that facility from a former Woods Park Neighborhood Association board member who lives next door. Again, no supervision, no support, just a bunch of 18 and 19-year-olds out having a good time. How about the house for vets with PTSD that's 3 blocks to the west of me? I learned about this facility from another Woods Park Neighborhood Association board member who I believe lives on the same block. Again, no supervision, just guys with a significant mental health problem trying to get by. How many other group residential facilities are there within line of sight of my house? How many within a mile of my house? I'll never know, because the policy of this city is they do not keep track of these facilities. No matter how bad they get, no one will ever step up and make sure that these facilities provide a safe housing for those residents. Here we go. This is a map that I got off the State Patrol website today. How about telling potential buyers of my house about the registered sex offenders living in the area? At least I can get that data from the Nebraska State Patrol. Currently, there are 9 registered offenders living within 4 blocks of my house, and another dozen in the neighborhood. Interestingly, look at how many reside in the center of town. Kind of looks like the map of the group living facilities that we already know exist in the center of town. And I'm going to leave this up because this is probably the closest map you're going to find that shows you approximately how many group facilities there are in this community that the city refuses to acknowledge, much less oversee. But more importantly to me, at what point does my house become unsellable to other people? At what point is the intrusion of so many special living arrangements with their transient occupants, the additional maintenance and services that landlords don't like to and occasionally refuse to pay for, more noise, more activity by both the residents and their visitors, yes, they have friends who stop by, more opportunities for mischief, the increased traffic on the streets, the narrow streets, the extra vehicles, taking up parking on the streets that are already full. At what point does that reduce the value of my home, and by how much? At what point do interested buyers drive by and seeing the chaos of the unregistered group living arrangements, unsupervised, unregulated, how often do they drive by and look and then just continue to drive on? They won't stop to check out my lovely, historic, beautifully cared for home because there's chaos. Block after block after block of these group homes. Not only am I going to have a harder time selling my house,
You've reached 5 minutes, so if you could please wrap up your comments.
Okay. Basically, this is eminent domain. The city's taking property of the people in the south neighborhoods by refusing to supervise any of these homes, and you're going to start having to pay us for that. Because if we lose value of our house because of your actions, you're responsible for that loss. And by law, and I'm a lawyer, we can come back and get the money back.
Any
you.
questions for our testifier? All right, thank you. And if our next testifier wants to come up to the empty podium?
Hi, my name is Mo Neal. Welcome to the new members and the old ones, some of whom I know. I live at 2701 South 13th Street, and if that seems to be kind of familiar to you, it might be because Friday morning at 8:30, I woke up to hearing a man yelling outside my house because I'm catty corner on the other side of the block from 2672, where the gun standoff was with a house that has had so many calls and reports about the people living in it, many of which I've made over the last few years. And it ended up in a close to 3-hour standoff with police, where I never saw so many police cars in one place unless it was, I don't know, a major police event somewhere. What I'm trying to get at is I also lived next to what was a transitional living home up until a year and a half ago. The people that lived there that were residents were fine in my book. Most of them were younger guys that had probably been incarcerated for minor offenses that shouldn't even have put them in jail, but the owners were trash. They would not take care of anything to do with maintenance of the facilities that didn't involve immediate danger. They were arrogant, obnoxious people who put up security cameras everywhere, yet when I had to put them up, they would stand in front of my cameras and mimic and make fun of my cameras constantly. That's all trivial. The parking was not an issue with those fellows because most of them didn't have a pot to whatever in, and they were walking or riding a bicycle to get where they needed to go. That's all fine, and I'm all for the need for lower income and this kind of housing that the collaborative needs to have. But to quote that gentleman over there, this current proposal as written sucks. It needs regulation, it needs oversight, it may need licensing, and it absolutely needs an on-site person living there who has the authority to take care of any issues that come up 24 hours, 365. The transitional living thing is strictly a scam to make money for anyone that buys the property who gets paid the $91 a night by the state to house each individual person in it. I don't know what the collaborative living thing, how it will be funded. Is that also another real estate I don't know what the word to use, a real estate scam to help someone buy a house that they will sell later for a greater profit? I'm really concerned about the issue of putting a square footage of a lot as a determination for how many people can live in a building that has a square footage that may or may not have more than one bathroom, yet 10 people could possibly be in there. Are you kidding me? What on earth are you thinking of? There is such a thing as a broken windows theory that's inconclusive whether that actually means anything or not, but often these houses that get taken are not in that great a shape. The one behind me, 2672, we've had so many reports in the last 2 to 3 years over garbage piling up, broken furniture, until just recently the kitchen cabinets were on the front steps and in the front yard. It has since been sold. The person that is living in there is not even a squatter by law, and yet they were dealing drugs, using meth, having guns in the house, which the police were damn lucky no one picked up and decided to shoot. And the police did an excellent job of taking care of that Friday. They were as patient as any people I've ever seen. But here was a site that had so many complaints about it, and when you'd call the police or linked up, uplink, you got nothing. the uplink things did not really get addressed very often, or if at all. I talked to Patty Newman, a former city councilwoman, earlier this morning, and asked her about this. She said there used to be a problem resolution team that would be focused on neighborhoods. You guys look like you know more about it. Why don't we have those again? If that disintegrated and turned into uplink, uplink is not working.
Mo, we're at 5 minutes.
Okay.
I just want you to wrap up your testimony.
I'm pretty much here as a private citizen, but I'm also on the Irvingdale Neighborhood Association Board, and I agree wholeheartedly with everything that lady whose name I did not get said earlier about what is going on. So thank you for your time. Do something right this time.
Thank you. We will have one more testifier, and then we will take a 10-minute break here. So if you, ma'am, would like to testify, we'll hear from you, and then we'll take a short break.
Good evening. My name is Jessica Isaki. I'm at 1200 South 20th Street in the Near South neighborhood. Before I begin my official testimony, which I do actually have copies for council members, if you guys would like those, I would like to remind everyone that some people have testified on transitional living and group homes, and the topic tonight is collaborative living facilities. We already have things codified in our Lincoln Municipal Code regarding group homes and transitional living facilities. Although I testified in opposition to this zoning code change when it was before the Planning Commission a few weeks ago, I'm here tonight in front of this body to testify in a more neutral capacity. I'd like to thank David Carey and the Planning Department, as well as John Carlson, Councilwoman Washington, for taking the time to meet with and to listen to those who are most impacted by the current code. A little less than a year ago, I stood before the council in support of a reasonable accommodation request that was made by my Oxford House neighbors at 1923 B Street. These folks are excellent neighbors, and I stand by my decision to support them last year. What makes my urban neighborhood great is not old homes or the restrictions placed on existing co-housing. Rather, it's the community that I can attest that these collaborative living facilities are an asset to my community. I believe Lincoln's urban neighborhoods should be open to anyone who chooses to live in them. Therefore, I applaud any efforts the city puts forth to craft more progressive housing policies, and I appreciate this attempt to create a path for collaborative living facilities to exist without having to go through the process of a zoning change or a reasonable accommodation request. I'm in full support of allowing collaborative living facilities, but do feel that this proposal is a little bit too restrictive. And here are some amendments that I would just offer for your consideration. The parking, I think, is really reasonable at 0.5 spaces per resident, but I feel there could be flexibility similar to that of the south of downtown planned unit development. Examples of this would be reducing required spaces if bike parking is available, or if there's a nearby transportation share station or public transportation hub. It's important to note, as I believe Wayne mentioned earlier, that this would additional parking and parking surfaces would kind of transform the lot. There would be more pavement, fewer permeable surfaces, potential loss of trees, landscaping, and aesthetic value. As far as the capacity, I believe this should be based on a minimum housing standards and life safety requirements. I think a few of us can probably agree on that aspect. Examples would be number and size of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, a max occupancy per bedroom, legal egress, smoke detectors. While I understand why it would be based on lot size, I do think it's kind of restrictive, and I really don't feel like it has anything to do with ensuring that people can safely cohabitate in a dwelling. Currently, 12 are allowed to stay in short-term rentals, so I would like to see the maximum number of residents allowed in CLFs increased from 10 to 12, or just simply base the maximum occupancy on what the dwelling can reasonably accommodate. As far as spacing requirements, while spacing requirements exist for group homes, transitional living facilities, and domestic violence shelters, I think it's important to understand that collaborative living facilities differ in that they are homes that people choose to live in for the purpose of peer support. Folks are not required to live in these homes, and they do not require many of the services or oversight that other co-housing models offer in-house. We do not have spacing requirements for large families, short or long-term rentals, vacation homes, or even fraternities and sororities, so I feel it's unfair to impose these restrictions on collaborative living facilities. Lastly, I believe it's time to revisit the amendment made to Lincoln's municipal code roughly 20 years ago, which prohibits more than 3 unrelated adults from cohabitating. What was its original intent? Is it still appropriate to limit co-housing opportunities, especially given the current need for more affordable housing options? The reasonable accommodation request has been used to expand the definition of family for the purpose of supportive cohabitation. Some of us have a higher quality of life when surrounded by our chosen family versus our biological relatives. So should the city really be determining what qualifies as a family? With that, I would be happy to answer any questions. I live between 4 Oxford houses, and they've all been excellent neighbors. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions for the testifier? All right, seeing none. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We will take a short break and be in recess until 8:05 and reconvene at that time. All right, we are reconvening here. We are reconvening public testimony on this item. So if I know there are a few people that want to speak, so please come on forward. We'll take two at a time, one at each podium. The floor is yours.
Good evening. I'm Jan Bain, and I live at 7300 Martell Road, Hickman, Nebraska. And I am a landlord, owner of the Oxford House Lioncrest, which is located at 1923 B Street. It was referenced earlier by some neighbors, and went through the process for approval for up to 14 to live in the house. I want to make myself available for your questions, definitely. And I'm basically saying that I'm neutral. I applaud that you're looking into a way to streamline the process to have collaborative living homes, but I also want to share some of my concerns with the current proposal. As you vote, I'd like you to think about, I know from previous meetings that the city expressed a need for the homes to be more spread out throughout the city. And I think when you start to restrict the number of vehicles, the total number of tenants per home by the lot square footage, and this was kind of mentioned earlier, you begin to actually restrict collaborative living houses to limited neighborhoods where homes are more reasonably priced for that square foot lot. This in turn makes it harder to find a property that meet the needs of the tenants and the restrictions of the city, which then lead to more waiver requests coming to you. Which I think is what we're trying to get away from, is some of those waivers coming to you. And then the time to establish the home, which then results in an increased wait list for the tenants and worsens the housing issue currently in the city. When I became an owner, I did some research, and the Oxford model stood out to me as something that had success. And I had a nephew that currently was living in an Oxford house. He went from going to med school to self-medicating to do the sleep, wake up pattern, and it led into an addiction. And he lived in an Oxford house for 3 years, and I'm happy to say he went through a treatment facility prior to going into an Oxford house. When he came out of the Oxford house 6 months ago and is doing tremendous. He moved out with 3 folks that were in an Oxford house, and they live in an apartment. I know that there seems to be a lot of concern with the collaborative living needing to be more monitored, more restrictive. I think it's important to remember these folks came out of some kind of treatment facility. They're sober when they go into this type of housing. This is where they go to have accountability with their peers and to hold each other accountable. And when you start to talk 3 or 4, as soon as one moves out or one's moving in, pretty soon you got like only 2 that really know each other. And that's not very good for accountability. I know that for a women's house, they talk about 9 being a good number. This is the Oxford model that I'm referring to. And for a men's house, they say 10 to 14. So it's 8 to 10 for women and 10 to 14. And it's because of some of the turnover that happened in the house. Now, like my nephew lived there for 3 years. To me, that's like most tenants. Some you only get for a year. I know that there's a lot that think that this must be people living on top of each other. I can speak for my house only, that is approved for 14. Most of them have a full-size bed. And they are in actual bedrooms that meet city code, because city has been called out by neighbors to come walk through my house, and it meets all of the city codes. And most of them have 2 beds in them, 2 full-size beds in them. There's only 1 room that has a single bed in it. So there is 9 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms in this house that has can have up to 14. The majority of their time, there's about 11. And so that's where I'd also like to point out some more flexibility in the number of tenants or the number of vehicles for this type of housing could actually diversify the neighborhoods that they could expand into, because it would allow them, for those that have vehicles, because they can within the Oxford house, and again, I'm only going to use the Oxford house model, they can work with another Oxford house that if you had folks that had better parking, more vehicles, to see about them getting into that house, having a house that had less parking, to put folks that needed more public transportation. So I think there's a little bit of self-regulating that can happen with vehicles. I also think that a square footage for the house itself is more important than the square footage of the lot. And again, meeting all those city codes.
We're at the 5-minute mark, so if you could just wrap up your comments, we'd appreciate that.
I guess I'd just like to open it up to questions to me as a landlord.
Very good questions. Councilman.
Thanks so much for coming down and providing, the other side of how these operate. I have 2 questions that I'd like to ask you, and again, not taking it as gospel, because we're just having a conversation. 2 of the things that were listed in the neighborhood's concerns and suggestions. One was about adding enforcement and oversight, and the other one was adding an articulate, strategic, reasonable accommodation process. So as someone who went through the process of becoming an Oxford house, I'd like to ask you about each of them, starting off with the adding enforcement and oversight. Since you run one of these, since you run an Oxford house, or I don't know if that's right. Own, yeah, thank you. What do you think would be like a realistic or a tangible way to add enforcement and oversight so that way neighbors aren't calling the police a lot, or to make sure that the houses are being run appropriately? Is there something that you can think of in your experience that we might not have in our back pocket because we haven't run? Does that make sense?
So I would just say the Oxford model already has their procedures in place. They have to have a job. They have to maintain sobriety. If they don't, they get kicked out. They literally take them to a facility to basically dry up. And they can't come back to that house. They have to then reapply for another Oxford house and prove that they are sober to get into another Oxford house. As far as the crime, I can tell you, I've had no calls to me about lion crust. The only criminal activity I can tell you that's taken place at this house is a neighbor spray painting the front porch when I bought the property, before my tenants even moved in, saying they didn't want an Oxford house there. So I would live next to the gentleman in my house every day over the neighbor who chose to spray paint my house. So I guess I'm kind of concerned that we assume that they're criminals. These are folks in sobriety that want to be contributing citizens. They want to be good neighbors. They're kind of afraid of their neighbors a bit at first, until there's sort of a proven equal respect as a neighbor.
For sure, for sure. I guess kind of what I was thinking more along the lines of, how do we make sure that folks in the house have that they're protected, right? And that they can, if things in the house aren't running smoothly, right? And I think we heard from someone like, there's been reports of like, someone shared that their experience was like, they might have bought drugs there, or that there's
So
people.
that's Michael's house. Michael's. I have not heard anybody bring that up about an Oxford house that has an oversight of a national program. So there's regional folks that do go to the houses, go to their meetings to make sure they're doing what they need to. And those might be paid folks from Oxford.
For sure. And again, I don't mean to imply that that was happening at you, or so I apologize if that's how that came across. I'm just trying to think broadly, since this is going to, incorporate potential Michael houses or potential Oxford house.
I guess one of the things when you're trying to regulate it in the capacity that I think you're talking about, it goes away from this just being collaborative, folks with like disabilities wanting to live together. To me, it's no different than if I had an ailment and I wanted to live with 4 people who had that same ailment. I don't need regulation. I need somebody who understands, a peer who understands what my ailment is and what I need to maintain my functionality, whether it's AA meetings, whether it's, I don't go anywhere without somebody with me because I don't trust myself.
And that actually kind of leads into the second part of it, was adding a strategic, reasonable accommodation process. Is there anything that you think would be appropriate to have in there for a strategic, reasonable accommodation process? Because it's based on the property, not based on the individuals, right? What do you think would be an appropriate reasonable accommodation process from a city zoning side of things?
I think if there was a way to look at it, the square foot of the house, I think parking is reasonable, but, you know, I can say, like, my house has an apartment complex right next to it that has 4 parking stalls, but the landlord doesn't let them use any of those 4 parking garages, makes them park in the street. So it's not my house that's necessarily adding the parking issue, but it's kind of getting blamed for the parking issue. So unless you're going to regulate the apartments, the group of college kids to, you can only have 1 vehicle for every 2 of you living together, I don't know how this collaborative living, putting those same restrictions in place. I think there's a lot of things that, I mean, I understand the concerns, and I make myself available as a landlord to help the city kind of come up with what this looks like, because I do respect, you know, when the city says that we should spread them out and not want them all in the certain neighborhoods. I understand that we don't want parking issues, to help come up with some of that.
No, I appreciate that. And if I could grab your contact information before you leave, I'd be really appreciative. And I appreciate you coming down and talking about what it's like to be an owner, because I think that is a vital portion to figure out how do we meet the neighborhood's needs and the neighborhood's concerns with what's realistic and can work.
You know, and I can't speak for other landlords, but I can tell you the property value matters to me. And the gentlemen living in my house are going to probably have to live there 8 to 10 years before I'm going to get back the equity I'm putting into that house. So it meets to be a beautiful house in that neighborhood. I want them to have a beautiful house to live in, just like anybody else deserves.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Any
I have
other questions? Yes,
sorry.
Councilman.
What do you charge for a resident?
So it's not per resident, and I don't set that.
Okay.
Oxford House sets that. I set it based on what I have invested in the house. So it's just like any other house that I have as a
Didn't answer
rental.
my question, though. What does a person pay?
I can't speak for that because it may be different per house for Oxford House.
What is it in your house?
They don't have to tell me that.
Who doesn't tell you that?
What they collect as a house, because it's ran sort of like a fraternity, if you will. I don't know what each gentleman in a fraternity pays, but they each have an amount they pay.
How much do you get paid per month?
How much do I make in rent? Mine is $3,200 for rent for my house.
That's divided by the 11 people?
Nope. I have nothing to do with what they collect per person.
So you get 3,200 no matter if there's 2 people living there or if there's 14?
That is correct. And they signed a 3-year lease. So that's also, I don't raise rent in 3 years. And if there's things that, you know, like have happened that, you know, I have to invest a lot of money in, I don't get to raise rent in 4 months. They know for 3 years that's their rent amount. And that is a common practice for Oxford houses is 3-year leases.
Okay, so you get paid from the Oxford organization?
So it's much like a fraternity. They have a president. They do democracy. They do their own meetings. They vote somebody to be like a house president. They vote somebody to be the secretary. And that secretary is the person who makes sure that I get paid. And they all pay money into that pot, I guess.
Okay.
And what it does is it ensures, I'm sure they probably collect a little more than what they collectively would be to meet that rent, but it pays for like social activities like a fraternity would do. It helps cover when, say, they might be down, 3 people decide to move out next, because again, it's voluntary to live there.
You don't know if a resident pays $300 a month or $500 a month?
I do not. I do not. And I do know they don't pay anything for the first 3 weeks that they're in there, because they know that it's somebody probably coming out of a treatment, needs to find a job. And they have to get voted into the house. So they have to be a good fit for the house. And so to me, and like, you know, some people had raised, you know, how do you know that these folks all really have a disability? Well, because I can tell you people in sobriety probably don't want people who aren't in sobriety living with them. They're going to first kick that person out.
Councilman, do you have additional questions for the testifier? Okay, very good. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much.
Thanks.
We appreciate it. If there's another party that'd like to testify, please come on forward and take the empty slot. The floor is yours.
My name is Saul Giesecke. I live at 1200 South 20th. So a few years ago, I accidentally ended up in a living situation that was a bit different than what I was used to growing up. My partner and I, and eventually nearly a dozen of our friends and people who would later become friends, occupied the majority of about 4 buildings on the corner where I live now, give or take. It wasn't necessarily on purpose, but you have an apartment below you or next to you open up and you let people know, and then they do the same thing with their friends. And it was just, people moved out and people moved back in. A lot of people lived in more than one of those 4 buildings. And we look after each other's pets and houses, and it really became kind of our own little like micro community. And it's not really what's being addressed by this bill, but it was probably the most closely connected group of people I've ever interacted with. And a lot of it worked because we were able to be on that one corner, like I said, it's not what this is about, but if any of us had been given the opportunity to all live in a single place, we probably would have jumped at it. And we definitely would have bristled if anybody had told we couldn't do it because we weren't blood related, 1 or 2 of us were. A couple people got married eventually, but, and it's probably not everybody's idea of what they want to live in. There's a lot of people who would rather have larger living spaces that they keep to themselves and a partner, or prefer to interact with their neighbors from their front porches, and that's fine. I frequently prefer to interact with my neighbors from my front porch. And everybody gets to decide for themselves how they want to experience, what they want their living experience to be like, and how much interaction they want with the community around them. And so a lot of times when we think about diversity of their neighborhood, we go towards the countries of origin, or what sorts of jobs and income levels and things like that. But we rarely take into account the fact that not everybody wants to experience their community in the same way. We make a lot of assumptions about how a family should be set up, and what sort of people are should be allowed to live together, and none of those are wrong, but none of those are things that I think that we should be tying to other people. I'm here on a neutral point on this, because I do think I do appreciate the recognition that having collaborative living facilities is something that we should be focusing on. It is going to be, I think, hugely beneficial to the neighborhoods that they end up in. I know I've really appreciated the Oxford House down the street on the handful of occasions that I've had the opportunity to interact with them, and I would love to see more. I would love to see more diversity in that sense in the neighborhood that I'm into. I don't know. I would call it as an overall benefit. But I do think that the thing as it's written is a little overly restrictive, because it does limit that sort of living situation not only to like very large lots, but also to I think it should be open to anybody who wants to choose to live in an environment like that, regardless of whether or not they have they fall under the Americans with Disabilities Act or not. That's pretty much it.
All right, very good. Any questions for our testifier? Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
If there's anyone else who would like to testify, we have one open slot over here. Go ahead.
Hello, good evening, council members. My name is Allie Christensen, and I'm a community organizer at Civic Nebraska, located at 530 South 13th Street. I'm testifying in neutral today on behalf of Collective Impact Lincoln, which is a partnership between Civic Nebraska and Nebraska Appleseed. Together, we serve 6 core neighborhoods and advocate for affordable, safe, and accessible housing. So I'm really happy to see that y'all are working on creating a path that makes this type of housing more accessible for folks who need it. And I'm also happy to see that this is advancing the comprehensive plan for safe, affordable, and accessible housing, as well as complete neighborhoods, where folks can have access to essential goods and services within 15 minutes of their home. I think this is a really wonderful example of how we can use policy to increase access to affordable and safe housing. What I want to call attention to today is the community engagement that has surrounded and informed this proposal. I want to first thank Councilperson Washington, Director David Carey, and John Carlson with the Mayor's Office, who have attended at least 2 meetings that centered folks who live in collaborative living facilities, mostly Oxford House residents with 1 person from Michael's House. I was able to attend those 2 meetings. In the report put together by the Planning Department, community engagement was listed as including, and this is on page 21, a Mayor's Roundtable meeting on February 13th, several meetings and discussions with current residents of facilities, which I assume are those 2 meetings that I attended as well. Neighborhood associations, I know there were a lot of these because I was able to receive email notifications about those. Interested individuals and community advocacy groups. I want to invite you all to take a moment to reflect on who we're centering in this decision-making process. Only 2 of those meetings, plus I'm sure many emails and phone calls, but only 2 meetings were held that centered folks who actually live in these facilities. And there have been many really great questions that those residents could answer. I hope that we can take some time to engage more with folks who would be most impacted by this proposal so that we can make it the best for them and be really intentional about this process. I think you can lean on other folks who are asking you to engage with impacted residents too, to really hold that space. One example that I want to call attention to came from our second meeting. These were held at Bennett Martin Library, and they were organized by a neighbor who testified earlier today. And at that meeting, I learned from Jan, actually, who mentioned it earlier, that the ideal occupancy for men and women in the Oxford House model, it's at odds with what's allowed in this proposal. The ideal number for men is between 10 and 14. That wouldn't be allowed under this proposal. And that allows them to really, it allows the Oxford House Democratic Leadership model to work effectively so that folks can heal communally and show up as their best selves, like in community, which benefits the whole neighborhood. And so I hope that through more conversations with folks who actually live in these facilities can help make a more intentional proposal. So thanks for all the work that you've done. I hope we can continue that.
Any questions for Allie? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. If there are any other testifiers, we have one podium open. Please.
My name is Shelley Stahl, and I live at 1954 A Street. I've lived there since 1989. I love my neighborhood, and I want to first thank everybody who worked on this proposal. I know a lot of hard work has gone into it, and I think this law would be an improvement over what we have right now, definitely. I just want to address one little issue, and it's the spacing. And the way I read this ordinance, and maybe somebody can correct me if I'm wrong from the planning department, but it appears that the distance requirement of 1,000 feet is only from one collaborative living unit to another collaborative living unit. And that is different than what the other group living spacing requirements are. The transitional living one, as I understand it, and the other ones are all from, the spacing requirements are from all the other group living requirements. And that's not right? I think transitional living is from any other, that distance is from any other, well, maybe I'm wrong on this, but when I read this section in here, it sounds like it's only the distance between one collaborative living unit and another collaborative living unit. So I think it should be from all the other group living units because that's what transitional living is, and I think otherwise, if you think about it, what you're going to end up with is you could easily end up with a house that's gotten a reasonable accommodation right next to a transitional living facility, right next to a collaborative living facility, and that's going to defeat our purpose. So anyway, if you could look at that issue, I think that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Any questions? We're good. Thank you. I appreciate it. Is there anyone else here who would like to testify tonight? Last call on testimony. Okay, very good. Director Carey, I am willing to bet that we have some questions for you, sir.
I'm willing to agree with you.
Counselors, is there someone who would like to start? Councilman Duden.
Mr. Carey, was there any consideration to distance to schools?
I think there was, at the beginning of the discussion on this, there was a lot of, everything was on the table. But, so the answer is yes to your question. We did not include that type of a requirement in this proposal.
One of the problems I'm having as being a new councilman is that this has been going on for over a year. And so I'm playing catch up with a lot of this. And I've got several people in my neighborhoods that are concerned about the distance to schools, traffic, whether it's foot traffic or people driving. And even some of the people that have testified today have talked about, being close to grocery stores and things like that, 15 minutes to maybe a bus stop, those kinds of things. I also wanted to find out, I think the parking issue is a big issue, especially in the older neighborhoods, because there seems to be a lot of apartments mixed in with old houses, and as a result of that, it's not just the people that live there, but the people that even visit the people that live there create those parking issues. So I kind of agree that a 1-to-1 ratio might be a better solution for the parking. And then I've had questions. In fact, I called the city attorney's office today because I was concerned about compliance, because there's really nothing in this ordinance that will specify how it's going to be enforced. And I think maybe the city attorney's office can address that, but it seemed a little clumsy, and maybe it should be included so that when people read this ordinance that they readily see what the penalties are if you're not in compliance. And I do kind of wonder, when we talk about compliance, how do we know the people in that house have those disabilities, that sort of thing. So I kind of agree that maybe some type of licensing or some type of oversight should take place with these houses. And that could be discussions that maybe have already occurred, but when you're a new councilman and now this is coming up for a vote, I think these are some issues that should probably be addressed.
Mr. C, you.
I didn't know if there was a question about the, I didn't know if you had other questions about the enforcement that you wanted me to address.
Well, yeah, that would be nice if you could address that.
Yeah, so Assistant City Attorney Tim C., 555 South 10th. You're right, there is one there is one penalty section for the entire zoning code, which covers, well, we're at 2762 and it starts at 2702. So there are 50 or 60 chapters within the zoning code. All of them boil down to that one. To date, we have not gone through and done separate enforcement provisions for all of them, because that enforcement provision applies uniformly across all of the zoning titles. So you're right, that there aren't separate penalty provisions in this, just like there wouldn't be for any of the other zoning ordinances. So transitional living doesn't have its own enforcement. Bars, off-sale alcohol doesn't have its own enforcement penalty. Building a commercial operation in a residential facility, same thing. It's all covered in 27. I think it's chapter 2781.
Okay, so what is the process if there's a complaint?
If there's a complaint, the complaint goes to Building and Safety. Building and Safety goes out and investigates the complaint. If there's found to be a violation, that would be referred to the City Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution.
So it'd take about 3 weeks to probably resolve something like that if someone called in?
That would be great if it took 3 weeks.
Okay. It's going to be longer?
It's going to be longer, yeah. The judicial process in and of itself will take longer than 3 weeks.
Councilman, other questions? All right, very good, thank you. Councilman Weber.
Yeah, just two questions for Director Carey. First, I just want to go on the parking issue. So if we were to raise the parking requirement of one spot per resident, and there are, let's say 6 individuals, right? What are the chances that a front yard would have to be paved, a backyard would have to be paved to make that compliant with the parking requirement?
That is a very good question. We did look at a range of lot sizes and for the different zoning districts as we were working on this proposal to kind of get a feel for what that would mean. It really depends on the lot.
Okay.
And it really depends on the underlying zoning, depending on how many persons would be allowed. I'm confident in saying that a lot that would have rear alley access would have a much easier time accommodating 6 instead of maybe 3 lots on site. But again, it really does depend on the layout of the lot. But again, I will go back to, as part of my answer though, I will go back to, that's the balancing act of what this proposal is saying, is that in one part of this proposal, we're saying we're going to have an upper limit depending on the lot size so that we wouldn't have a number of people living there above a certain number, whether it's 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. And that'll limit the amount of parking spaces that would be required in a general sense. And so by doing that, the 0.5 where we landed on the proposal anyways seems to be reasonable in the sense of that how many people are actually going to be at any given house.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then the other issue I just wanted to get into is the spacing that just recently came up. Am I correct in stating that transitional living is there spacing requirements from all of the group living situations, but then the other group living situations are only spaced out from one another? So a group home is spaced out from transitional living, but also another group home, but not necessarily collaborative living.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
So you have the group living is spaced to other group living, domestic shelter is spaced to other domestic shelters, and then the transitional living one is the one that is spaced to all other group living uses.
And what could be a potential consequence if this collaborative living had a similar burden that transitional living has within being the spacing requirements from all of the other group living situations?
So what would happen in that sense is certainly the spacing requirement would kick in more immediately for a new collaborative living use that comes forward for this conditional use permit, because there would be some existing other group living uses if that requirement was added to this. So that would be the immediate impact. It certainly would also limit more the locations that a collaborative living house could be located.
Thank you. That's all I had, Chair.
All right, very good. Thank you. Councilman Shob.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Mr. Carey, thanks for coming forward. I'm going to do a couple of things and have a little conversation with you if you don't mind. Three currently existing: domestic shelters, group homes, and transitionals. People threw the word halfway houses out there, but we don't do halfway houses in our code? Question.
We don't call it that. I mean, I think a halfway house historically could fall under transitional living.
Okay.
That's where I would fit it mostly. But you're right, we don't necessarily have that written out in our code.
And what we're talking about today is another land use model that we can talk about, because we're talking about zoning, only land use today. Is that fair to say?
Well, land use and zoning requirements to go along with that activity that we're talking about, the actual collaborative living as defined as in the proposal, is a new use, and then we're talking about the zoning regulations that would go around that.
Is there an application process for those three existing uses? And how do we find out if there's a new facility operating in our community?
So yes, there is, as those other uses, the domestic shelter, transitional living, and group homes, those are the other three conditional use group living permits that we have. So yes, they would basically process similar to what we've explained how this would work tonight, which is there are regulations, there's conditions of approval. They would basically apply for a building permit, and then they would be identified as abiding by those rules or not, and then they would be allowed to move forward without a public hearing of some sort.
And you said those were all conditional uses.
Those that I mentioned are, yes.
And if this is successful and passes, it would be a new conditional use.
Correct.
And as an applicant trying to get that use, if I didn't agree with someone, I could ask for a waiver, which is different than the request for a reasonable accommodation.
So there really wouldn't be a waiver process for conditional use.
There's no waiver, okay.
That's a little bit more applicable to a special permit.
Okay.
Which that's a different process. Some other uses have that pathway. That's where you can have a little bit more discretion in what the city council ultimately would approve or not approve, and what conditions.
We can establish more rules and put more.
Right. So this is either you meet it or you don't. I don't know if you're going to go in this direction, but in this case, because we know of the history of the use here, there still would be the reasonable accommodation pathway.
Option available to the applicant.
Correct.
And then that would be before if they chose to pursue that, then the city council could evaluate the several conditions to see if a reasonable accommodation would be appropriate or not.
Based on what the application is requesting, yes.
Again, I want to go back just a little bit, just one more question. The land use, we had lots of testifiers and lots of residents in our community that said we should be licensing and demanding services. Does the planning department have the ability to do that? Was that within your jurisdiction to license or require treatment services to residents of a conditional living facility? No,
that's not within our purview. And so I'll take some liberty to answer that
Please,
question a little more fully.
Help me.
So I think this is a good opportunity just to kind of remind that kind of what we have before us to consider right now and discuss is a zoning code amendment. And within the zoning code, there are certain things that we do regulate, certain things we do not regulate. A lot of testimony tonight was referencing transitional living. We already have that use in our code. We already have rules that regulate transitional living. What we're proposing is not transitional living. This is a different new use to be added into the code if it's approved in some form. It is different than transitional living in many ways, but it is probably most different in the sense that people that live in collaborative living situations are there on their own volition. They are not required to be there. They are not told to go there. They can leave at any time. And so part of that also is that is a reason why the proposal before you for collaborative living is different than transitional living because that level of expectation of oversight is different for this use. It is not a requirement under this proposal. And then to get back to your original question, that wouldn't be, the oversight and licensing is not something that, through the zoning, that the city would do in the first place. That's where parole and probation comes in at the state level. And I will not discount the frustrations that we heard tonight from those testifiers in those situations, but that's not what we're talking about tonight. That is not what this use is about.
Would passage of this ordinance, this amendment, would that give the city council and the city more power to guide the establishment of these new facilities?
Well, yeah, inherently that if we approve a set of regulations for a use and define the use and put it on the books, I don't know about I guess power is a way to put it. It provides that framework from which to work within for this type of use that we know is out in the community, we know is a need in the community. So it provides the framework to work within, and it also probably ultimately eventually will inform some of those reasonable accommodation requests that come in still as well. So you have a starting point. I think that word has been used a lot tonight, starting point. This is a starting point for the use.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for accommodating.
Councilman Bowers, yes.
Would you mind putting up the PowerPoint again? That's kind of the launching point for some questions that I have. And it's helpful if I just have like the numbers in front of me. Will you go to the slide that's before spacing? Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Okay, so can you give a brief, quick overview of the difference between R2, R3, and R4 and R5, and R6, R7, and R8?
Yes, I might ask Steve to come up just to be my backup on that. So
Yeah.
covering all the bases here. So in a general sense, from R1 to R8, it's scaled so that the allowed level of density increases as you move along. Then you have a set of different lot and height regulations for the lot as you move along that spectrum of different densities of residential. So your R1, R2, R3, and R4, those four basically are single-family duplex. You start to get into multifamily as you enter into R5, and then the densities allowed, you don't always see those densities, but allowed densities go up from there up to R8. That's a beginning point of answering your question.
Sure. No, that's super helpful. When I look at in newer neighborhoods, many lots are 9,000 to 10,000 square feet. This proposal would allow 6 persons on this type of lot. Not that angry, I swear. Generally speaking, when I look at this, it almost makes me feel like that some of our older neighborhoods, some of our core neighborhoods don't have the same protections that newer neighborhoods have. So even though a newer neighborhood may be able to have a collaborative living facility, and I was messing around a little bit on the zoning map, and I had a hard time trying to figure out, what exactly was the difference between like R4 and what would be R6, right? So like at first glance, when I look at this, it almost feels like we are bearing the brunt of this on our core neighborhoods and established neighborhoods because they're not newer. Could you just kind of respond to that, and if that's a misconception or if there's like a thread of truth to that?
I picked up on your comment earlier about that, and I've been thinking about it. I looked at our zoning map as we were listening to the testimony as well. Just looking, just because of what district you're representing, the vast majority of that is R2 as well as R3. And so we'll start with that in fact, that's the majority of land area throughout the city as far as residential is concerned. So I think that it might be a little bit of a misconception, but we would start with that. And then, so it is actually, if you look at the R2 and R3 for the 7,100 square foot lot, that's pretty much what is going to be allowed for that type of lot. Now, again, I said earlier that there's different size lots out there. It's not always going to be the same. There'll be some larger lots that would allow for more. But that is the predominant pattern of zoning in residential areas throughout the city. And even in newer areas, there's often an R3 PUD in newer developments. So the underlying zoning is the R3, so it's not completely dissimilar. They are larger lots, generally speaking. But that's where the 6 persons would fall into coming into play. I think part of what some of the comments over through this process have been based on related to the brunt of this potentially being met by older neighborhoods is that in newer neighborhoods, not every neighborhood that's older has covenants built into them when they're created. And I think that there is a differentiation there for older and newer areas. It's not completely consistent, but that generally speaking, that is probably where some of those comments are coming from. And we did receive some of those comments in our process, so it's a real concern.
Mm-hmm.
The question about covenants and how they apply or don't apply for this, so that's a private agreement. So we don't address covenants in our zoning. That is a private, more or less an accepted private agreement between landowners in mostly newer neighborhoods that have used that tool. There's a question out there about the legality of that in not allowing this type of use in those areas as well. But that is probably another challenge or a process in the future that we're not really right now talking about.
For sure. And I think I have the right zoning map up. Do you foresee, and I don't know the percentages of like how many neighborhoods, because it's all kind of like, it kind of looks like election districts, right? With the zoning, with how they're kind of like jagged and whatnot. Do you foresee a challenge that could arise where a person that wants to put in one of these facilities to then request a change of zone to then have a higher density allowed?
Good scenario. Certainly, it's possible. I mean, we don't like to talk in hypotheticals.
Yeah, you're right.
When
Yeah.
we're doing this, but yes, somebody certainly could come in with an application to ask for a change of zone. I will speak, and I'll start talking about that, but Steve has a lot more background in this. We have a long history here in Lincoln of not supporting and almost always not approving spot zoning. So there's got to be a nexus between the proposal and how it would fit into a zoning pattern. So Steve, I don't know if you want to talk about that.
I mean, because we had that come up in different circumstances. That somebody wanted to say, well, my block on the north and south side of the street is R2, but I want to have 10 people in my place, so I want to go to R4. And we'll point out differentiating one house to have a different zoning than all the rest of it is picking out somebody for a benefit that is not available to everyone else in the block. And certainly the city attorney's office can point out there's been a lot of court cases for decades over that showing that that's an illegal action to have a spot zone, a true spot zone. So we would let people know, hey, it's contrary to our comprehensive plan, but it's also well established in case law that that's not a good thing. Not to say you can't look at our map and find circumstances of little one. Often a lot of those are because zoning went from an R5 or an R6 down to an R2. We had about 14 down zonings that occurred a good 20 years ago, and that's why you have a lot of R2 in older neighborhoods, is they used to be R4 and R5, and they went down to R2, but there's a few holdouts that the council left behind, so to speak. So you get a little spot of maybe R4 or 5 for half a block or a block because they were left versus, those were used to be R2 and went up zoned. They were actually, everybody else was down zoned, but they were left with the zoning that they had. And sometimes you get little spots that are older commercial areas like 40th and Randolph where there used to be 1 or 2 little businesses on the corners. You have this little speck of B1 surrounded by R2, but that's because of a zoning pattern that predates the 1950s.
Sure. And you're right. When I look up Witherby which I'm honored to have in the Northeast Lincoln District, the Witherby neighborhood, I do see R2, 4 persons allowed being the highest requirement for that area. This is just a comment, and then I'll kind of wrap up because I have some things I need to reflect on and do some digging on. But I mean, I'm really curious to see so we have our city, and then how much of our city would these facilities be allowed in when we take into consideration HOAs or whatever else? Because I do kind of feel like that it is congesting in our core neighborhoods and it's not providing the same opportunity across our city. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying, and I'll reiterate that, it wouldn't be homeowners associations. It would be if there were legal covenants that are attached to whatever area we're talking about. That is not, we don't have purview over that private agreement. So I guess that's how I have to answer it that way.
No, because I guess in like my perfect world or whatever, or if there's a way to do this, it's, if this is something that's going to be placed upon most neighborhoods in my district, I don't think it's right that homeowner associations don't have to take on that same civic responsibility that neighborhoods like Havelock, Witherby, and Clinton and East Campus will have to take on, and that they would have to take on.
But I would point out, if somebody comes in and they meet our collaborative living rules and they're in a R3 zoning and the HOA does not allow collaborative living, we still approve it. So it's not like the HOA can stop the city from allowing the use. The stopping is, does the HOA decide they're going to sue the member of an HOA for violating their own covenants? And that's a private party to private party that we really can't stop in the state of Nebraska and Lincoln, one private party from suing another private party for violating the covenants.
That's a good point, actually. The process still would come through for approval.
And I guess, like, I understand that that's like the technicality of it, but I think like in practice, you know what I mean? I don't see a lot of people taking on the risk of getting sued by their HOA in order to put one of these off. And then instead they're going to go to a neighborhood like Witherby, where there's less likelihood of being sued. So I'm just trying to figure out how do we spread this civic responsibility all across our city instead of compacting it onto neighborhoods like Witherby and my Northeast Lincoln district.
Any other questions, sir? Nope. Okay, very good. Councilwoman.
By virtue of going last, I think all of my questions have been answered. I actually only had one, which was similar to what James just said. I'm sorry, Councilman Bowers just said, because I've always been very interested in. Let me turn my mic on. Oops. Councilman Bowers raised the question that I really had coming into this evening, which was how to spread the responsibility of collaborative living across the city. And I'm very glad to hear Mr. Hendrickson explain that the city will say all parameters have been met if this were to pass, and then it's up to someone in an HOA to argue, but not here. But the city won't be hemmed in by what an HOA may require or not allow. And I appreciate that. I think it still leaves us in the same situation that Mr. Bowers just said so clearly. But yeah, I've heard a lot of folks in the last 6 months and in the last couple of weeks talk about these issues here, and I really do thank you for doing all the research work and the law department for doing all the research work on this and for everyone participating. And I know that there is a feeling that we're not listening if we haven't made changes so far, but we are listening, and I'm probably going to come back with some questions after a little bit more reflection of what we've heard tonight. Thank you.
Are there other questions for Director Carey? All right, seeing none. Thank you. Appreciate it. Madam Clerk, would you please move us forward?
That concludes our public hearing session in section 6 of our agenda. We shall now move on to section 7, ordinances, third reading and related resolutions. I'll be calling item 7A, authorizing Lincoln's electric system to enter into one or more subordinate credit agreements with Union Bank and Trust not to exceed $50 million, introduced by Weber.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Carlson. Discussion? Seeing none.
Carlson?
Yes.
Weber?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Duden,
Yes.
Bowers.
Yes.
Beckius.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Item 7B is amending the pay schedule for employee group whose classifications are assigned to the pay range which is prefixed by M by changing the pay range for Class 2028 Parking Manager from M04 to M05, introduced by Weber.
So moved.
Second?
Second, Carlson. Discussion? Seeing none. Madam Clerk?
Washington.
Yes.
Bowers.
Yes.
Carlson.
Yes.
Duden.
Yes.
Weber.
Yes.
Schob.
Yes.
Beckius.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Item 7C is amending the pay schedule for employee group whose classifications are assigned to the pay range which is prefixed by A by changing the pay range Class 3668 Public Health Accreditation Coordinator to Public Health Performance Management Coordinator from A15 to M04, introduced by Weber.
So moved.
Second?
Second, Carlson. Discussion? Seeing none. Madam Clerk?
Weber.
Yes.
Bowers.
Yes.
Carlson.
Yes.
Duden.
Yes.
Schob.
Yes.
Washington.
Yes.
Beckius.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Item 7D is change of zone 23031, application of Wyuka trustee chair for the Wyuka Historic Park for a change of zone from R4 Residential District to P Public Use District, from B1 Local Business District to P Public Use District, and from P Public Use Street to B1 Local Business District, generally located at the southeast corner of North 35th and Q Streets, introduced by Weber.
So moved.
Second?
Second, Carlson. Discussion? Seeing none. Call the roll.
Bowers.
Yes.
Carlson.
Yes.
Schob.
Yes.
Duden.
Yes.
Washington.
Yes.
Weber.
Yes.
Beckius.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Item 7E is change of zone 08057E, application of Urban Development Director to amend the University Place PUD planned unit development to allow the sale of alcohol for consumption on and off premises with associated waivers on the property generally located at 2747 North 48th Street, introduced by Weber.
So moved.
Second?
Second, Carlson. Discussion? Seeing none. Let's vote.
Carlson.
Yes.
Schob.
Yes.
Duden.
Yes.
Washington.
Yes.
Weber.
Yes.
Beckius.
Yes.
Motion carried 6-0.
Yes. Mr. Bowers has left the meeting.
And she caught that quickly. You
Yeah.
said that was impressive. Yeah, eyes in the back of her head.
I got young kids. That concludes Section 7 of our agenda. We shall move on to Section 8. Resolutions first readings are items 8A through 8N. Section 9 is ordinances first reading and related resolutions are items 9A through 9G. Section 10 of our agenda is pending list, items 10A through 10D.
We have now reached the public comment section of today's meeting. Anyone wishing to address the council on a matter not on this agenda and not planned to appear on a future agenda may do so at this time. Is there anyone who would like to testify during the public comment session? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I motion adjournment.
Second?
Second, Carlson.
Carlson.
Please call the roll.
Duden.
Yes.
Schob.
Yes.
Washington.
Yes.
Carlson.
Yes.
Weber.
Yes.
Beckius.
Yes.
Motion carried 6-0.
We are adjourned.